I have created scientific magic. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 351. Avoid the enemy's strengths and attack their weaknesses. I have checked it, Lord Adloir, and the secret passage is still passable, the old Susie said excitedly. After we capture the capital, I will tell the Pope about your achievements. Adloir nodded, and then explained to the confused bishops. Few people know that in order to avoid failure in the fight for the throne and end up dead, the eldest Prince Harold deliberately dug a secret passage underground in the capital. The entrance is in a deep well in the slums of the capital, and the exit is in the dense forest of the West Gate. Only the eldest prince and a few trusted confidants knew about this. It's a pity that the evil god believers captured the capital too suddenly. On the way to the secret passage, the eldest prince was blocked by two teams of musketeers, and both he and his guards died in the chaos of gunfire. Only Susie received the order to guard the exit, so he escaped. Hearing this, the bishops present realized that Adloir had a plan. The offensive at noon today seemed fierce, but it was just a test of the tricks of the evil god believers. Paulson, you lead a part of the Dark Guards to sneak into the capital and wait for my orders. Adloir ordered again. Yes, I will obey the will of the Lord, Paulson replied respectfully, and all his doubts about Adloir's poor command were swept away. The Dark Guards are a special force carefully cultivated by the Church. They are not as famous as the God's Punishment Army and the Griffin Knights, but their abilities are equally outstanding. They are the best killers and spies. There have always been voices in the Church that the existence of the Dark Guards has defiled the holiness of the Lord, but Paulson is not one of those old stubborn conservatives. In order to deal with those insidious and cunning evil God believers who master strange witchcraft, sometimes you have to use some shady means. The strongest fortress is often broken from the inside. After agreeing on a plan to capture the capital by cooperating with the outside forces, the bishops discussed how to deal with the endless new weapons of the wizards and reduce casualties as much as possible. Although these weapons are powerful, they take some time to operate and prepare. I have observed that the interval between shots of the handheld muskets is about 1 minute, but they will be divided into multiple sections to shoot, creating a continuous offensive, and the interval between more powerful artillery is about half a minute. A cardinal analyzed with a serious look. Such a long interval is undoubtedly a huge flaw. If there is no barrier of the city wall, they only need to use divine magic to protect thousands of cavalrymen and rush through forcefully, and they can easily win. In addition, judging from the style of the weapons, the melee ability of these musketeers should not be strong. Some bishops even arrogantly believe that only 800 divine punishment soldiers are needed to kill tens of thousands of musketeers on the city wall. During the day, their vision is very wide, and they can fully exert the power of these weapons. We may adopt night battles. No matter how powerful these new weapons are, it is futile if they cannot aim accurately, a cardinal suggested. This is undoubtedly another advantage of theirs. Whether it is the God's Punishment Army or the Griffin Knights, with the assistance of their own divine arts, they can see in the dark and exert combat capabilities that are not inferior to normal, but their enemies may not be. Very good plan, Edwill said appreciatively. It is not practical to find a way to crack it in such a short time, but they can completely avoid the enemy's strengths and attack its weaknesses. Then, let's set the time in 5 days. Edwill made a decision. 5 days? Paulson thought about it. That should be the time when reinforcements arrive. In the next few days, tens of thousands of troops of the Church were surrounded outside the city, except for the Griffin Knights flying over the capital from time to time to carry out routine harassment. There was no other action. While Lin En was busy developing new firearms, he did not neglect the exploration of intelligence. He arranged a whole brigade of musketeers to stare at the actions of these people with telescopes, and asked some psychic wizards to control some inconspicuous small animals to see if they could sneak into the enemy's tent to get some information. However, their enemies obviously had extremely rich experience. The entire camp was wrapped in a divine magic barrier. Whether it was a flying bird or a walking beast, As long as it was contaminated with magic, it would be identified when passing through. Even the few moles that Lin En personally controlled were dug out from the ground. This perception ability was terrifying. In the end, they could only settle for the second best and conduct exploration from a distance to assist the musketeers in their exploration work. Aren't divine magic and magic the same thing? Why can they easily tell the difference between the two? Lin En was puzzled. After learning the whole story of the birth of the Holy See, this doubt has been lingering in his mind. I don't know much about this. I'm afraid only the speakers know the inside story. Raphael hesitated and shook his head, then lowered his head to check the two intelligence in his hand. Whether it was the musketeers observing through telescopes or the psychic wizards controlling living things, the news reported was very consistent. In the past few days, the Crusade army of the Holy See has been cutting down trees in the dense forest outside the city and making new siege equipment. They are busy and should not have any intention of attacking in the short term, so we can take a good rest for a while. Raphael slowly breathed a sigh of relief. It seems that they did hit the Crusade army hard in the last battle and established a certain deterrence, so that they dare not act rashly. Of course, it is also possible that Edwell thinks they are a tough nut to crack, so he plans to wait for the arrival of reinforcements. It's better not to relax your vigilance. Lin En did not agree with Raphael's judgment. Sometimes the calmer it is, the more undercurrents are surging. By the way, can we also create a magic barrier covering the whole city like them? Lin En suddenly asked. This is undoubtedly a good way to prevent being attacked and can save them a lot of trouble. I'm afraid it's not easy. Raphael shrugged helplessly. The area of the capital is too large, dozens of times larger than the camp set up by the Vatican's crusade. The consumption of magic power will definitely be an astronomical figure. Even if these great wizards join forces, they may not be able to hold on for long. Using the magic stone reserves to hold on is not the solution. Wizards are not like those priests and bishops. They can get the help of the false god by shouting a few words of praise. Chapter 352. All these tribulations are God's tests. Due to the limited supply of magic stones, they can only give priority to protecting those key places. For example, granaries, armories, or alchemy research institutes. After Dennis's explanation, Lin En had no choice but to give up this wonderful idea and continued to ask with regret. Then the believers in the royal capital and the nobles under house arrest have not made any unusual movements recently, right? Compared with external threats, he was more worried about the chaos in the royal capital. When the situation became difficult, it would be really troublesome. We have been sending people to monitor those nobles, and the people in the royal capital are relatively well behaved, except for the training team who caught a few poor people who gathered to pray. The rest of them have not made any unusual movements. The one who answered was Redel, who was recently in charge of patrolling and defending the royal capital. However, this job was not easy, because they had occupied the royal capital not long ago, and some believers were still very resistant. Since the royal family was still there, they could not gain the recognition of the poor by dividing land and hanging those evil nobles. The only thing to be thankful for is that when they captured the capital, the cardinal had helped them catch the fanatics, and now they were all taken to the mines for reform. The rest were ordinary believers. Although they believed in the false god, Ella, they were not so fanatical that they would sacrifice their lives for it. Concepts cannot be changed in a short time. Lin En nodded. He also had a rough estimate of the situation inside the capital. After thinking for a while, he made a suggestion. You can try to start from the mistakes and omissions in the Bible. Pick some that are easy to prove and disprove, and do some novel experiments. The more eye-catching the better. You can also give this knowledge to children first. Their acceptance ability is always higher, and then slowly influence those adults. Hearing this, Riedleton's eyes lit up and he immediately ran to make arrangements. Lin En didn't care about Redel's impetuous temper. He took the map next to him and thought about whether there were any omissions in the defense of the capital. I think your arrangement is perfect. Raphael shook his head helplessly. In his opinion, Lin En was a little too cautious. He had also seen the defense map of the capital. There was a post every 5 steps and a sentry every 10 steps. Many emergency measures were also arranged to ensure that if there was a riot in any area, More than 1,000 musketeers and at least 50 wizards would arrive at the scene within a minute to suppress the rebellion. It is enough to deal with the riots of those believers, but what if the Crusade army of the Holy See suddenly appeared in the city? These forces alone are far from enough, and the losses will be unpredictable, Lin En said worriedly. But didn't you ask King Hatcher before? The capital did not leave any secret passages when it was designed and repaired. Raphael said hesitantly. What if they dig a tunnel directly? Lin En asked back. How is this possible? Raphael rolled his eyes. The station of the Crusade army of the Holy See is at least 10 kilometers away from here. Even if they dig at all costs, it will take 10 days or half a month. By then, their new weapons have been developed and they can launch a counterattack. Lin En didn't think so. He had seen the time and space gate in the magic stone mine. Maybe those clergymen also mastered similar magic. Recently, those Griffin Knights have frequently come to harass and explore, risking being shot down. Most of them have deep intentions. Lin En touched his chin. It's a pity that these griffins have a very sensitive sense of smell and the production of laser launchers has not been completed. Otherwise, he could send airships to cut off the enemy's food supply. No matter how powerful a person is, he still needs to eat. Even great wizards like them are no exception. They may be able to survive by starving for 3 or 5 days, but it will have some impact over time. Well, maybe that false god, Ella, is an exception. When Lin En was wondering whether the gods needed to eat, an apprentice knocked on the door and walked in, speaking respectfully. Master Dean, Master Anthony is looking for you, as well as several alchemy masters from the Research Institute. What a coincidence. It seems that our new weapons have been made. Lin En's frown finally relaxed. I have been annoyed with the Crusade army of the Holy See for a long time, Raphael also said happily. These days, they have been hiding in the city and passively taking beatings, and the depression in their hearts is about to explode. A day passed in a flash, and the poor people in the capital have gradually adapted to the wartime life. When they looked up, they could still see the large group of Griffin Knights passing through the sky. The shadow brought by the rain of fire that fell from the sky 5 days ago still loomed in everyone's heart, but life still went on anyway, and they could not stop their work even in the war. Gryffhook is an ordinary poor man in the capital. Before those damn wizards occupied the capital, he would go to the church every week to listen to the teachings of the priests, confess his sins, and put all his meager savings except for his livelihood into the church's offering box. According to the priests, the sound heard when copper coins are put into the box is the sound of the soul being purified. Gryffhook deeply believes this, because he is too poor to have a wife or children, and his only hope is to ascend to the kingdom of God after death and enjoy endless joy and happiness. There are endless steaks and endless wine, and beautiful elves as servants to serve his daily life. The kingdom of God has everything he longs for. Gryffhook has always believed that his faith is extremely firm, until 2 months ago, when the group of evil God believers invaded the capital to create killing and chaos. The call of the Lord suddenly sounded in his mind. But Gryffhook was afraid and hesitated, and did not obey the first call, because there were vicious wizard minions outside. If he dared to go out, he would definitely be captured and sacrificed to the evil god, and his soul would fall into the endless abyss. Afterwards, he heard that the Lord's incarnation had descended to the capital, but was dispersed by several streams of light. Gryffhook was both confused and terrified. God is great, eternal, omniscient and omnipotent. Even if only an incarnation had descended, it would be impossible for him to be defeated by a group of evil God believers. This must be fake. It must be an illusion created by those weird wizards, a blasphemy against God. Just when Gryffhook's mind was wavering, a cardinal suddenly appeared in his home and responded to the confusion and puzzlement in his mind. Everything he experienced was a test from God. It was because the nobles and subjects of the kingdom of Hadra they had wavered in their faith in the Lord that such a disaster was brought about. Chapter 353 These wizards have been bewitched by the devil and their minds have become seriously disturbed. Gryffhook returned home carefully, locked the not-so-strong door, and then walked into the empty inner room, prostrating himself on the ground, and shouted with great respect, "Lord Person!" After the voice fell, a figure in a golden and red robe appeared in front of him, and a majestic aura enveloped the entire room. oppressing people to the point of suffocation. No one followed you today, or noticed anything wrong? Person asked solemnly. No, those wizard minions are very strict, but they never attack civilians without reason, Gryffhook answered fearfully. Person's tense expression relaxed a little, and he continued to ask, did you get any useful information? It has been 5 days since he arrived in the capital through the secret passage, but he has been lurking without further action. This was undoubtedly a correct choice, because after investigation, Person found that the guards in the capital were much stricter than expected. There were musketeers guarding each city, and the two teams looked after each other, so it was difficult to defeat each of these sentries. In this case, Person did not even dare to use divine magic easily, otherwise he would be discovered. Fortunately, they were lucky. Not far from the ancient well, they found a more devout believer. After some inspiration, he became their eyes and ears, responsible for finding out the news from the outside world, reporting to the Lord. According to the information I have inquired, the wizard's minions have captured 5 downed Griffin Knights and are now detained in the prison set up in the XC area, Gryffhook said with his head down. It seems that Arno has indeed been caught, Person thought to himself. With the opponent's strength, even if he could not escape the lightning net spreading over the capital, he would never be killed on the spot. Since he did not cause trouble in the capital, he was most likely caught. Person recalled the map of the capital. It was not far from here to the prison where they were detained. Although he did not like the arrogant Arno, he was a colleague after all. Saving him would increase his chances of winning the battle in the capital. And when I went to the market today, I heard those devil's followers say. Gryffhook hesitated, not knowing whether he should speak. What did they say? Person frowned. They said the Bible. There are many fallacies in the Bible, Gryffhook stammered. For example, the geocentric theory in the Bible is actually wrong. In fact, the continent under their feet is rotating around the sun because of something called gravity. For example, the continent is actually round, not flat, because when standing on the sea and looking at the distant watchtower, you always see the top of the tower first, and then the tower body. And the lunar eclipse phenomenon is that the planet rotates to the center of the sun and the moon. The lunar eclipse they see as the projection of the continent under their feet. Those wizards even said that they calculated the circumference of this continent, which is 43,200 kilometers, Gryffhook said with a slight tremor. How ridiculous. Person was immediately amused. These followers of the evil god were simply daydreaming. How could the continent under their feet be round? Wouldn't they all fall down? And how was the circumference of 43,200 kilometers calculated? Did they measure it with a ruler? Those wizards actually tried to deceive the followers of the god with such ridiculous words. It was simply nonsense. After a pause, Gryffhook did not continue to speak, because the other party also conducted some strange experiments on the spot to prove these conclusions that sounded counterintuitive. The child of the hunter family next door whispered to him that he understood and could even replicate those experiments. The continent under their feet might really be round, but he himself was confused the whole time. It seems that these wizards have been bewitched by the devil and their minds have been seriously confused. Person sneered and then asked about the most heavily guarded mansion. Person had a hunch that this place was not ordinary. The guards were tighter than the palace. There must be some unspeakable secrets inside. Gryffhook shook his head. There were guards at that place all the time, so he had no way to get close. In that case, you should go and rest first. Person had no intention of making things difficult for Gryffhook. He waved his hand and let him fall asleep. At the same time, a series of black shadows turned from virtual to real, and emerged in this small room. A secret guard in the lead stretched out his hand and handed over a roll of secret orders. Person took it solemnly, and immediately set it on fire after reading it. The opportunity is tonight. At midnight, on the wall of the eastern section of the capital, Ham was holding a musket in his hand, stationed in front of the observation tower. Waves of sleepiness kept attacking his brain, making his brain a little confused. Although he would take turns to guard every night, and even divided it into 2 halves, he was already over 50. And his energy was different from that of his youth. After holding on for a few hours, he couldn't stand it anymore. Let's sleep for a while. The enemy will not come to attack in the middle of the night. Besides, there are other people to help watch. One more person is not much, and one less person is not much. Such thoughts kept flashing through Ham's mind, but when he thought of his duty, he regained his strength. Just hold on for a little longer, it will be time to change shifts in just a short while. In a daze, Ham fell into a state of dreaming and waking, and vaguely the ground seemed to be shaking violently, and it was getting stronger and stronger. Wake up, enemy attack! At this moment, a roar came from another lookout. Ham was immediately startled and subconsciously put his musket on the city wall, but it was pitch black in front of him, and he could only vaguely see the figure reflected in the distance by the fierce bonfire on the lookout. Fortunately, the wizards stationed on the city wall also reacted, and hundreds of dazzling fireballs flew into the sky, and the flames of the explosion reflected everything in front. Ham and others couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. Tens of thousands of enemy troops in the distance had crossed the 2-kilometer cordon and entered their attack range. Standing in the front row were priests and bishops in white robes with solemn expressions. There were more than 1,000 of them. They prayed in unison, and the loud hymns could be heard clearly even from 2 kilometers away. Damn it, they are about to launch a general attack, Sanchez, who was in charge of the rotation, said solemnly. You know, in the battle a few days ago, these priests watched from afar as those cannon fodder rushed over to die, but now they actually took the lead. Sanchez immediately realized that this was not a small test. This was a decisive battle. Chapter 354 The decisive battle is coming. This attack came very suddenly. According to the intelligence they had obtained before, it would take at least half a month to manufacture a batch of siege equipment, even if they used divine arts. Under the cover of night, the Vatican's punitive army arrived quietly less than 2 kilometers away from the city gate. The loud hymns came to an abrupt end, and a cardinal in the front row of the priests opened his arms, and the light of divine arts immediately bloomed outside the city. Summon, divine kingdom guards. In an instant, the mountain shook and the earth trembled. 70 huge stone statues, 5 meters tall and wearing armor, rose from the ground, holding a solid giant shield in their hands and blocking it in front of them. A strong roar came out of their hollow mouths, and then they took heavy steps and crashed into the city wall. Send someone to notify Lin En. Sanchez did not dare to neglect it at all, and shouted loudly, then turned his head to look at the stunned people and shouted loudly, "What are you waiting for? Get the electromagnetic cannons ready." Under the control of several wizards, the 7 electromagnetic cannons installed on the city gates immediately emitted several deafening roars. 7 dazzling streams of light flew out, aiming directly at the huge stone statues. The powerful electromagnetic shells immediately collided with the thick earth shield, just like passing through a thin piece of paper, accompanied by a tooth-grinding explosion. The thick earth shield immediately collapsed, and the projectiles that were burned into red instantly hit the God's Kingdom Guard behind, and then suddenly exploded, smashing half of the stone statue's body to pieces. However, almost the next moment, 6 of the 7 broken stone statues began to repair themselves, and even with only half of their bodies left, they did not stop running. Attack the abdomen, that's the core. The sharp-eyed Yuland immediately noticed the problem and reminded loudly that the destroyed stone statue was just pierced through the center of the body by the electromagnetic cannon and directly collapsed. The gunners immediately adjusted the trajectory, but it was late at night and the visibility was extremely poor. It was not easy to hit the God's Kingdom Guard, while it was running under the cover of the giant shield and accurately hit the core. After 5 rounds of electromagnetic artillery fire, only 10, God's Kingdom Guard, were killed, and the rest had already rushed into the range of the artillery. The continuous sound of artillery rang out, and nearly 100 artillery guns continued to bombard these huge stone statues, but the power was much weaker than that of electromagnetic guns. Even if it was a head-on hit, it could only slightly block the opponent's momentum. At least 3 to 5 shells were needed to hit at the same time to knock down or disperse a God's Kingdom Guard. Under the cover of the huge stone statue holding a large shield, tens of thousands of the Vatican's crusade troops also launched a charge. Kill these blasphemers, for glory, for victory. God is with me. The drums of war were like thunder, and crazy roars resounded throughout the battlefield. Under the light of the fire, tens of thousands of the Vatican's crusade troops rushed to the front line like a black tide. The majestic city wall in front was like an isolated island drifting on the sea, as if it would be submerged in an instant. Ham and others on the city wall felt their scalps numb, and the muskets in their hands did not stop for a moment, constantly firing, loading, aiming, and firing again. However, due to the disadvantage of vision at night, most people could only shoot randomly in the direction of the enemy's rush, which obviously could not stop the crusade troops blessed with divine arts. Soon, the huge stone statues in the front row and the more than 20,000 noble coalition forces in the back were less than 200 meters away from the city gate. The situation has reached an extremely critical moment. At this moment, 200 official wizards suddenly stepped forward and cast a spell together. The coalition soldiers who were about to rush to the city wall immediately felt that the solid ground under their feet collapsed immediately. Below was a dark abyss, and the sharp spikes at the bottom could still be vaguely seen. The width was 20 meters and the depth reached more than 15 meters. This was the third ring magic, Earth Trap. However, this magic alone was obviously not enough to create a pit surrounding the entire city wall. These traps had been dug long ago, and then the elemental wizards created a not-so-thick layer of earth and stone on top as a cover. In the last battle, due to the limited intensity of the war, they had been holding back from using this trap, just for this moment to come. The more than 2,000 coalition soldiers who rushed to the front all fell down, either died on the spot, or were pierced through the body by sharp spikes. Those huge, God's Kingdom guards, were no exception. Nearly half of them were trapped in the pit and could not climb out for a long time. The traps set up in advance effectively blocked the offensive of the expeditionary army and also brought a chance for the defenders on the city wall to breathe. However, before Sanchez and others could breathe a sigh of relief, the pit caused by the ground sinking technique was broken. One after another, green branches emerged from the ground, emitting the glory of divine arts, entangled with each other like vines, forming dozens of divine bridges that were strong enough to withstand artillery fire in a short period of time. It was the bishops who took action. Not only that, countless flashing points of light lit up on the dark battlefield, gathering together to form a terrifying energy wave that rushed towards them. Under the extremely fierce explosion and energy impact, the magic barrier protecting the defenders on the city wall was broken. Whether it was the large number of God's Kingdom guards, or the strong attack of the expeditionary army, there was only one purpose, that is, to cover the bishops into the attack range of divine arts. Sanchez, who realized this, immediately understood that the most difficult moment had arrived. Fortunately, the time they had bought was not meaningless. The guards on the city wall had been reinforced from the original 8,000 to 25,000, half of whom were musketeers and the other half were royal guards. But even so, they needed more support, because the Griffin Knights in the sky were already in place, and the rain of fire fell again. At the same time as the frontal offensive began, Person, who had already sneaked into the capital, had also begun to move. A large number of dark guards took advantage of the chaos and the cover of night to remove the guards on the street, and then under Person's order, they were divided into two parts. One part went to the prison to rescue the captured Arno, and the other part quietly went to the Alchemy Institute, which was the most heavily guarded in the capital. Not only that, the elite of the church, a large number of God's punishment army, also arrived in the capital through the secret passage, and Idwayru led the army personally, that is, to break from the inside, and the victory or defeat will be decided in one battle. Chapter 355. The capital is in crisis due to internal and external difficulties. The sound of artillery resounding through the capital woke the generals and the people from their sleep. After 5 days, the fear of war once again filled everyone's heart. Regarding the war outside the city, the people in the capital were divided into two situations. Those more devout believers prayed from the bottom of their hearts that the messengers of the great Lord could drive out the evil and let the kingdom of Hadjarata return to the Lord's arms, while the rest of the people fell into panic and confusion. At the same time, in a courtyard of the palace, Lin En and others who were discussing the counterattack plan also received an urgent report from the servants. The Crusade army of the church outside the city suddenly launched a large-scale attack. It seemed that the elite troops were all out, and even the priests had been dispatched. Sanchez, who was stationed, urgently asked them to send more people to support, otherwise the city gate would likely fall. "It's so fast. It seems that they are already waiting anxiously before we take action," Raphael said with a sneer. "But it's only been 5 days. If Adelaide dares to take action, he must have something to rely on." Adela frowned and guessed with a worried look. The expeditionary army retreated in a disastrous defeat, leaving behind more than 20,000 corpses. He thought that the other side would need at least 10 days or half a month to rest before launching the second wave of offensive. But he didn't expect it to come so quickly. "I received news before that a support corps of about 40,000 people has arrived at the capital and joined the expeditionary army. I think they probably plan to launch a general attack under the cover of night." Lin En pondered. "In this way, the advantages of our new weapons are weakened." Everyone present immediately realized the problem. The range and power of muskets and artillery have always been their reliance on easily defeating the imperial army and achieving an excess casualty ratio. Now that their vision is restricted, the musketeers and artillerymen cannot effectively attack the enemy at a long distance. Once the hand-to-hand combat begins, these temporary signs will appear. The musketeers who have only been trained for a few months will never be able to defeat the elite of the church. They may even be defeated directly. Thinking of this, Raphael spoke anxiously. "That means the number of enemies outside the city may exceed 100,000. We must send people to reinforce Sanchez and his men immediately." Since Sanchez took the initiative to ask for support, it means that the situation is very urgent. The contingency plans they made are far from enough to deal with the powerful offensive of the church's crusade. Lin En nodded, looked around the conference hall, and then asked Anthony, Adela and other 5 great wizards to lead 200 official wizards to the city gate for support immediately. In addition, another 5,000 musketeers and 10,000 guards will be dispatched. "Isn't this a little less? I remember there are at least 7,000 musketeers in the capital," Adela asked, puzzled. "They trained about 30,000 musketeers, of which 18,000 were responsible for defending the city, and they rotated 3 times a day to ensure that their combat effectiveness could be fully deployed to the battlefield when necessary. The remaining 5,000 were used as reserve forces to provide support at any time, which was the personnel Lin En was dispatching now. In addition, there were 7,000 people scattered throughout the capital, 4,000 guarding the granaries, ammunition depots and various key nodes, and there were still 3,000 people who could be deployed. Or even more extreme, those defensive personnel could be deployed to the battlefield. The number of enemies may be beyond imagination, and now any force is very important, and these people can be fully utilized. No, the troops guarding the capital cannot be mobilized anymore. They need to be responsible for maintaining stability in the city," Lin En said firmly. "Also notify Alex and others to let the airship take off, eliminate those arsonist Griffin Knights, and then support the battle on the front line. That should be enough." Compared with Raphael and others who experienced such a large-scale war for the first time, Lin En was still very calm in the face of such a crisis. Although the Vatican's punitive army was coming fiercely, he knew that it would not be so easy to capture the royal city from the front. The walls of the royal capital were 18 meters high, and they had been reinforced by magic. There were also hundreds of wizards to help defend. Even if Edwill put in a lot of strength, he would inevitably be beaten to a pulp. On the contrary, it was necessary to reserve some fresh troops inside the royal capital. Otherwise, once there was chaos inside, it would easily cause a chain reaction and lead to a complete defeat. "Okay, since you insist." Adela shook her head and said nothing more. She immediately stood up with Anthony and summoned a group of wizards to rush to support them, not daring to delay for a moment. Raphael, who stayed behind, was a little worried about whether air combat at night would affect the performance of the airship. Although laser transmitters had been installed on each airship, how to aim was a problem. "It doesn't matter. It's the same for them during the day and at night," Lin En said, but he didn't mean to explain in depth. Then he called Alok and asked him to turn on the power device in the Alchemy Research Institute. Of course, he had considered the possibility of a night battle, so they had not done nothing in the past 2 months since they captured the capital. In fact, he had ordered people to build a power cycle covering the entire city, and installed the simple electric lights developed a few months ago in various places on the streets of the capital. However, since the power reserve was not sufficient and had to be supplied to the electromagnetic gun, which was a big power consumer, it had never been turned on. Now that Abwayar was planning to launch a decisive battle, there was no need to save electricity. Lin En was thinking carefully about whether there were any omissions, and suddenly remembered something. By the way, where are the speakers? It's been a few days, haven't they arrived yet? He remembered that before leaving the wizard land, Rav had promised him that they would rush to Hajarata after they finished dealing with the affairs of the parliament. After all, after the Holy See knew that the fall of the kingdom was related to the wizard land, it was very likely to dispatch legendary forces. Unless these great wizards attack together, it would be difficult to compete with them. I heard that 2 speakers have left the wizarding land, but I don't know why they haven't arrived yet. Raphael said hesitantly. Were they delayed, or was there something else that delayed them? Lin En thought to himself, it's impossible that the church sent another army to attack the wizarding land at the same time. Even if that's the case, they should have received some news. But since Herv and others haven't arrived yet, they can only rely on themselves tonight. Chapter 356 Glen, let them see the speed of light. In the capital, the chaotic situation was spreading rapidly. The Griffin Knights who fell from the sky did not intend to set fire this time. Instead, they relied on the cover of night and the advantage of vision to swoop down directly, attacking the guards below with claws or divine magic, and then flew into the sky freely before the counterattack came. Aim at me, shoot down those damn griffins. The sergeant leading a team of musketeers was furious, and could only passively command the musketeers to aim at the sky and fire continuously. However, they could only use the little light from the crescent moon to barely see the terrifying beasts that suddenly fell from the sky. After a round of shooting, not even a griffin hair was knocked off. Just as the musketeers began to load ammunition, a sharp dagger emerged from the darkness and instantly cut the sergeant's throat. Then the elite dark guards took advantage of the chaos created by the Griffin Knights in the city and quickly eliminated the guards stationed in this area. But soon they started a street fight with the reinforcements that came over. The 2 sides fought each other, and screams, roars, and wails echoed in the dark night. With the harassment of the Griffin Knights and the cover of the night, the Dark Guards almost had an absolute upper hand. The musketeers could only kill a few enemies with the first round of concentrated fire, and then they could only wave their bayonets and fight the Dark Guards who rushed up. Corpses fell on the street one after another, and the bright red blood slowly flowed down the blade, soon dyeing the ground red. The people of the capital could only curl up in the house, praying that the battle would not affect them. Haydn was one of them. However, unlike most believers who devoutly hoped that the messengers of God could defeat the evil, Haydn did not want to return to the life of the past, because since those wizards occupied the capital, they have set up many new things called workshops, recruited a large number of workers, and were willing to give extremely generous treatment. At first, everyone guessed that these so-called workshops must be a lie of the devil, a complete scam, but Haydn, who had nothing, didn't care. He only knew that the kings blocked the capital and didn't let them go out hunting, and he would starve to death without food. So Haydn entered the workshop with the mentality of dying anyway. But the result was different from what they all expected. It was not a place for wizards to experiment with evil magic. Their job was to burn and process various ores. In addition to providing lunch, the workshop would also give them 6 kingdom silver coins every month. When he really got the money, Haydn was confused. In just 2 months, he had completely bid farewell to the hard days of eating one meal and not the next. And he couldn't help but begin to doubt the words of the priests. Are those wizards really the minions of the devil, the spreaders of plague and the embodiment of fear? You have to know that after conquering the capital, these people did not rush into their houses to rob their property, nor did they massacre the believers of God. In the battle 5 days ago, The messenger of God flying in the sky set fire to their houses and even burned to death several believers who were cheering and kneeling outside. On the contrary, the minions of the devil were willing to help them repair their houses after the disaster. Thinking of this, Haydn began to pray to the unknown existence that the wizards could win this battle. Perhaps his prayers worked, or perhaps it was due to other factors. The dim outside of the house suddenly lit up, and it was getting brighter and brighter. It was not the red and hot firelight, but a soft white light, as if night had turned into day in an instant. The changes in the outside world were even more obvious. The soft white light first appeared in one area, and then spread to the entire capital with the transmission of electricity. Those dark guards who had been hiding in the darkness and shadows and quickly dealt with various areas by sneak attacks were forced to stand in the light under the light brought by electricity. The musketeers who had been completely suppressed immediately cheered and began a real counterattack. They were not afraid of fighting with the enemy. What kind of magic is this? Vader, who led the Griffin Knights in the sky, noticed the abnormality on the ground at the first time. The entire capital seemed to light up and turned into a huge luminous body. What kind of magic could cover such a huge range? Could it be that the legendary wizard had taken action? Vader's expression became a little solemn, but fortunately he soon realized that these lights were emitted from the round bubbles hanging on the street. They should be some strange witchcraft props. As long as they were destroyed, the magic would naturally stop. Realizing this, Vader immediately prepared to call on the Griffin Knights to disperse and use magic to destroy these light sources. However, before they could make any move, they saw a huge monster appearing in the sky above the capital. Under the moonlight, it looked extremely majestic and was rushing towards them. Haha, I didn't expect these cowards to have the courage to come out. Vader laughed and stopped the previous action, and led the Griffin Knights to meet the airship. It is obviously more important to solve these threats in the sky. In short, these weird and huge alchemical creations must not be allowed to reach the front battlefield. In comparison, the trouble on the ground was nothing. The role of these secret guards was just to assist and create chaos. When the Divine Punishment Knights led by Lord Edelweiss arrived, all the rebels were just a bunch of chickens and dogs. Everyone, keep a distance of 50 meters. No close combat. Use divine magic to attack. Wade raised the warhammer in his hand and shouted loudly. This was the optimal distance he came up with based on the last lesson. 50 meters was not too far or too close. They could use divine magic to attack the airship, control the griffins under them to avoid the opponent's aiming, and prevent the enemy from adopting a strategy of mutual destruction. This time was his revenge. At this moment, in the airship, as the captain, Alex was extremely nervous as he looked at the approaching Griffin Knights. A few days ago, he witnessed a friendly ship being destroyed in front of him, so he was naturally very clear about the threat posed by these Griffin Knights. Lord Glenn, aren't we going to do it now? Alex looked at the wizard on the side and asked anxiously. Don't worry, let them get closer. According to Dean Lin's intention, we must completely destroy these Griffin Knights this time. Glenn shook his head and told Alex to be patient. Then, as if he had thought of something, he asked with a smile, by the way, have you ever seen the speed of light? Chapter 357. This is the power of laser magic. The destruction of the Griffin Knights. The speed of light? Alex shook his head blankly. He only knew that light was everywhere during the day and could illuminate every corner of the world. Couldn't this thing arrive instantly and have speed? The speed of light is 299,500 kilometers per second, which is enough to circle the continent 8 times, Glenn explained, while casting his eyes on the Griffin Knights galloping in the distance. Under the cover of high-speed flight and night, only a series of figures could be seen looming in the darkness, which was difficult to aim, but Glenn was not worried, and soon launched the 3-ring magic, heat perception. The whole world changed in Glenn's eyes in an instant. The surroundings were still dark, but the flying Griffin Knights were extremely eye-catching and turned into red spots of light. This heat-sensing technique is the latest achievement of their research on light. It allows the caster to see something named infrared by the magic star. The identities of hunter and prey changed at this moment. Glenn raised his hands, and a hot ball of light immediately appeared around him. Then a circular reflective layer appeared around the ball of light, blocking all the light. At this moment, The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. The leader, Wade, could even clearly see the uniformed figures on the airship, and also sensed the fluctuation of magic power. Is it a wizard? Wade thought to himself, but he was not afraid at all. Their flexibility in the air is not comparable to those Devil's believers. Although the opponent's magic is powerful, as long as they can't hit, they are just living targets. A sneer appeared on the corner of Vader's mouth, but the next moment a warning suddenly appeared in his heart. Then a strong light beam as thick as an index finger shot out from the airship not far in front of him. At a speed far beyond his reaction limit, it instantly penetrated the divine protection he had laid before, and drew a gorgeous arc in the air. What a fast light! Vader only had time to flash this thought in his mind, and then his whole body was broken into two parts from the middle, along with the griffin with a severed head under him. The same scene was played out in various places above the capital. 150 airships were deliberately arranged in a semicircular array, and then there was a massacre. Strong lights lit up on each airship, and before the Griffin Knights noticed the danger, the dense light beams had already reached them. The attack came so fast that in a flash, hundreds of Griffin Knights were cut off and fell from the sky, with either confusion or joy on their faces. It was not until their companions were attacked that the remaining Griffin Knights reacted, but they were also confused for a while. Some Griffin Knights witnessed their companions who were fine just now being beheaded after the laser passed by. They were so scared that they wanted to flee, but the beam soon swept towards them. After accumulating strength, the effective killing distance of laser magic was about 120 meters. Ali and others at the center of the circle were like holding a 100-meter-long sword in their hands, and it was still the kind that had no weight at all. According to the arc length calculation formula, only 1 degree of movement of the laser can sweep across a large area, not to mention that there is more than one airship in the sky. 150 laser beams intertwined with each other, forming a beam grid covering the entire area. The Sky Overlord that had been showing off its might before was now completely a bird in the net, with nowhere to escape. Screams and roars came one after another. Under the baptism of the beam grid, the entire area turned into a Shura field. Countless Griffin Knights were chopped into pieces, and blood was spilled all over the sky. More and more Griffin Knights realized that running away was futile, so they shouted, "For the glory of the Lord and God is with me," and then launched a crazy suicidal attack. Although most of the Griffin Knights' divine arts were only at the level of priests, and they could not break the magical protection on the airship for a while, there were too many of them. This time, Edwell brought a full 800 Griffin Knights to conquer the kingdom. Even if the unlucky ones who died under the white phosphorus fire and lightning net were excluded, all the members of the entire Griffin Knight group were present, which means that each ship had to face 5 opponents. Under the suicidal offensive of the Griffin Knights, more than 20 airships were hit by successive divine arts and fell into the capital below. As the battle in the sky started, the battle in the capital had also entered a white-hot stage. "Don't panic, hold on," Old York shouted hoarsely, his face full of solemnity and panic. When he was assigned to the slums of the capital to assist in defense, Old York was very regretful. Being safer in the rear meant that he had lost the opportunity to be promoted based on his military exploits. Who would have thought that after the war began, the enemies appeared one after another from nowhere and appeared directly in the capital? They could still barely deal with the Dark Guards and Black. After losing the protection of the shadows, facing several rounds of musket fire, the enemy did not dare to show up easily. But after those divine punishment knights, who were like human-shaped beasts, arrived at the battlefield, the line that had been stabilized with great difficulty was directly penetrated in just a few minutes. They had retreated again and again, and the number of fallen companions and guards had exceeded 2,000. Under such adversity and heavy casualties, Old York had no choice but to constantly comfort everyone, saying that support would come soon, and they just needed to hold on, just a little longer. The dense sound of muskets continued to ring on the streets, and every second there were musketeers who had run out of bullets waving bayonets and charging, using their lives to slightly block the enemy's advance. Time passed by minute, and the people who persisted finally got the support they expected. But the number of people was much smaller than Old York had imagined, only more than 100 people. led by Alok and Lydia. "Lord Alok, is it possible that there are no more people in the capital?" Old York's face showed a deep disappointment, but he also knew in his heart that there were battlefields everywhere, and the wizards might not be able to get out for a while. "It's really just us." Alok nodded, and Lydia beside him added confidently, "But it's enough." They were not many in number, but they were all equipped with the most advanced percussion guns and brought 3 super-killer weapons. They originally planned to support the front-line battlefield, but after learning that the situation here was urgent, Lydia immediately brought people over. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 358 The Roar of Heavy Machine Guns. This is not a battle, it is a massacre. While the front line had not been completely breached, Lydia and Alok immediately directed everyone to get busy, setting up 3 machine guns on both sides of the street, and the soldiers equipped with percussion rifles were neatly lined up in 2 rows. The enemy came much faster than they expected. Almost the next moment after they formed their formation, hundreds of God's Punishment Army in fine armor rushed over from a distance. Dozens of people in the front row held big swords and huge shields in their hands, forming a solid shield formation. "Are they the God's Punishment Army? They don't look special," Lydia muttered softly. Old York's mouth twitched involuntarily, and he quickly reminded them, "Lady Lydia, don't underestimate them. These people are very powerful. They can easily win even when facing the siege of several people at the same time. Moreover, the giant shields in their hands are blessed with divine magic, and it is difficult for muskets to penetrate." Although most of the musketeers were on the battlefield for the first time, they faced some powerful monsters during the training in the wizard land. After hard training, their bayonet skills were not weak. These God's Punishment Army could still kill them quickly like cutting melons and vegetables. Even though the number of guards in this area was much larger than that of the enemy, they were inevitably defeated all the way. "Then let me see it." Lydia straightened her face and raised her hand to gesture. The musketeers behind her immediately understood and placed the red bullet into the gun chamber, and then raised their guns and aimed at the enemy who had stepped into the range. "Shoot!" As the girl gave orders, 100 musketeers divided into 2 columns and launched a volley. Bursts of harsh gunshots rang out in the narrow street. The dense bullets collided with the heavy shield, and then suddenly exploded. This was the armor-piercing shell produced by the Alchemy Research Institute. The effect was very significant, and more than 20 people were killed and injured in an instant. Old York and others suddenly showed a look of surprise on their faces, because their biggest headache before was how to break this turtle shell. However, as the most elite legion of the Holy See, no soldier of the God's Punishment Army retreated because of the huge power of the new musket. They directly ignored their fallen companions and rushed to the range of 70 meters before the second row of musketeers' volleys arrived. In the previous battle, they already knew that this kind of witchcraft weapon would take at least 1 minute to reload ammunition after the attack, which means that after this round of volleys, the enemy in front of them would become a cowardly sheep that they could not slaughter. However, along with the second volley, there were 3 machine guns set up on the street. Under the cover of the smoke and fire caused by the explosion of the armor-piercing shells, bursts of roars like a string of cannons began to explode. Da-da-da-da-da. The bullets from the 3 machine guns poured out crazily, creating sharp sonic booms in the air, and fierce flames spewed out. As soon as the soldiers of the God's Punishment Army rushed out of the smoke-covered streets, they were met with overwhelming fire. No matter the sophisticated armor they wore or the strong physique they were proud of, they seemed extremely fragile in front of this dense barrage that was enough to tear steel. Dozens of God's Punishment Army soldiers in the front row were covered with red blood mist, and they were instantly shot into sieves. The narrow street is undoubtedly the best place to exert the power of machine guns. There is no possibility of hiding. All they can do is charge, and charge again. As long as they can rush in front of these people, they will usher in victory. It's a pity that they lost the bet. When the 3 machine guns were turned off, there were only broken bodies on the street. Old York and the others were stunned when they saw this scene. The massacre lasted only a little over a minute. The hundreds of God's punishment army that troubled them and caused great chaos in the capital were wiped out. It seems that we are still more powerful. Lydia smiled proudly, but after looking at the ammunition depot that had been exhausted, her face suddenly fell. A full 3,000 rounds of fixed ammunition, which was the amount that dozens of wizard apprentices had spent 3 days on, were all used up. How could they support other battlefields? The power of the machine gun was great, but the consumption of bullets was too terrifying. Old York also recovered from the shock and hurriedly spoke. Lord Lydia, the enemies we killed were just a small part of the invading army of the capital. I estimate that at least 2,000 God's punishment army reached the capital through the secret passage. So many. Alak frowned. Although they just killed more than 400 soldiers of the God's punishment army with ease, Alak was not like Lydia to look down on these elite troops of the church. From the fact that these people were able to defeat the king's capital guards, which were several times their number, it was clear that they were not easy to deal with. Without the assistance of the powerful firepower of machine guns, it was not easy to deal with so many God's punishment army, even if the new troops equipped with percussion rifles were included. Do you know where they went? Alak asked. Some of them dispersed and created chaos in the king's capital. As for the main force, judging from the direction, they should be heading to the Alchemy Research Institute. Old York said solemnly. Then don't worry. Lydia breathed a sigh of relief. The Alchemy Research Institute had strong defense, and most of the new troops equipped with percussion rifles were guarding there. However, the development of the matter was obviously beyond Lydia's expectations, because following the God's punishment army to kill the Alchemy Research Institute, there were also 2 cardinals, Person and Arno. It seems that this is the core of the entire capital's defense force. Person stepped into the Alchemy Research Institute, which was filled with blood and shouts of killing, and used divine magic to explore it. As he had expected, all the magic power was gathered here. As long as this place is destroyed, the capital that was as bright as day will sink into darkness again, and the protective magic set up in various places will instantly disintegrate. Arno, who had just been pulled out of prison, had a ferocious face. During the few days he stayed in the capital, he was tormented by those damn psychic wizards. But he could only endure it and managed to escape the cage when the capital was in chaos. He was already furious. Let the glory of God wash away the sins here, Arno shouted ferociously, and a huge sacred power began to surge around him. A huge roar resounded through the sky, and deep trenches crisscrossed on the ground. Large areas of buildings collapsed and shattered under the ravages of the sacred power. Countless ruins flew in the air, like a doomsday storm, rushing towards the wizards who were still resisting. Chapter 359 Arno, the fire of hell is nothing more than this. Apocalypse storm, Arno shouted wildly, squandering the powerful divine power in his body recklessly. Purest and others who retreated to the courtyard looked desperate, and could only watch the powerful divine power carrying the debris all over the sky rushing towards them. The power of the cardinal is another level. If there is no wizard of the same level to take action, they can't compete with the 2 cardinals of the Holy See in front of them. However, this must-win attack was blocked. A fierce wall of fire rose up, and the surging flames went against the trend and engulfed the divine storm, and then rolled it back with even more powerful power. This is the 4th ring magic, Red Dragon Breath. The difference is that this fire is not an ordinary flame, but a dangerous and difficult white phosphorus fire. Person looked solemn and did not dare to take it head-on. Even the crazy Arno gave up the idea of a head-on confrontation and raised his hand to set up several divine barriers. Boom tilde. The horrible explosion sounded in the whole courtyard. When the smoke and dust dissipated, the whole area was reduced to ruins in the huge shock wave. The street lights around kept flickering until they went out. Arno and Poulsen, who were protected in the center by the divine magic barrier, were unharmed. However, 2 of the 3 divine magic barriers that were set up before had been broken. Not only that, the flames also attached to the divine magic barriers, slowly and firmly corroding the power of the barriers. Is this the so-called hellfire? Arno's face showed a little disdain and raised his hand. God's rain. The blue divine magic light swept out, and under the cover of water mist, The flames attached to the barrier were immediately suppressed. Just as Edwell said, water can temporarily suppress it. If it is blessed with divine magic, it can also be extinguished by stripping away air and temperature. It seems that it is just so, Arno said with a sneer. Person's eyes turned to the courtyard. The one who had just cast a spell to interrupt their sabotage intentions was naturally Lin En, who had arrived. He was accompanied by Raphael, who stayed in the capital. Dean Lin En, Master Raphael. Pierce wiped the cold sweat from his head and shouted happily. The people stationed in the Alchemy Research Institute also showed joy on their faces, which meant that they were finally safe. Fortunately, you kept a trick. Otherwise the capital would be in real danger now. Raphael looked at Person and Arno in front of him and said with fear. Fortunately, they did not rush to the front line together, otherwise no one in the capital would be able to stop the two cardinals. With the fall of the Alchemy Research Institute, the entire defense line might also collapse. After all, the generators and the magic arrays that protect magic are all set up here, and many research results will be leaked. Lin En did not reply, although he had made some arrangements as much as possible. The current situation was not optimistic. They had to solve the trouble here as soon as possible and calm the chaos in the capital. Choose an opponent. Arno, you go first. Person glanced at Arno calmly and said. Arno grinned and said, in that case, I'll take the 300,000, and you go deal with the other one. Person nodded, and was quite happy about it. He was not so keen on wealth and glory, and he also knew that a guy who could be offered a bounty of 300,000 by his superiors would not be easy to deal with. 300,000? Lin frowned, not quite understanding what the two cardinals were talking about, but he thought it would not be a good thing. In any case, we will find out by catching a live person and asking him. Lin's face suddenly turned cold, and the index and middle fingers of his right hand trembled slightly, as if he was plucking the strings of a guitar. The invisible ripples spread forward in a semicircle at the speed of sound. Arno and Person both felt that their brains seemed to be hit hard by someone, and their bodies stagnated. Raphael, who had fought side by side with Lin, naturally knew that this was some kind of unique sonic magic, and would not miss this opportunity. Disintegration Ray. Raphael used the most powerful 5-ring magic that he had mastered. Just as its name suggests, once it touches the target, it will quickly decompose it. It is a higher level magic of advanced material deconstruction. Fortunately, the effect of the resonance magic was only a short moment. Person, who was targeted, reacted immediately. Before the disintegration ray destroyed the divine protection and arrived, he tried his best to deflect his body, but he was still inevitably hit in the shoulder. The part that touched turned into nothingness in an instant. Damn it! Person walked between life and death, and stepped back several steps in a row. Under the power of healing magic, the disappeared flesh and blood recovered at a very fast speed, and once again blessed a more powerful divine protection around his body. Arno's speed of breaking free was even faster than Person's, but his movements were the opposite. Instead of retreating, he stepped forward. The floor tiles under his feet cracked and sank directly. The next moment, Arno had crossed a distance of dozens of meters and appeared in front of Lin En. He chopped down with a heavy sword in his hand, which was shining with the glory of divine magic. The sword blade cut through the air with a sharp sonic boom. Every cardinal is not only a powerful divine magician, but also a leader among knights. Unlike bishops like Person who focus on the use of divine magic and neglect the training of physical skills, Arno puts most of his energy on close combat. With his extraordinary speed and strength, he can often chop off the heads of those wizards before they cast magic. But this time the opponent is obviously different. At the moment of the battle, Lin En's eyes have become empty. Every movement of Arno was slowed down hundreds of times and disassembled one by one. Iron elements surged in Lin En's empty right hand, and a sharp iron spike appeared out of thin air in his palm. It hit the balance point of the sword with incomparable precision. With a force far inferior to that of the opponent, he directly deflected the powerful blow. The sword energy composed of the brilliance of divine magic plowed gullies on the ground, spreading dozens of meters away, and directly cut through the solid wall of the courtyard. Arno was quite surprised that the opponent could deflect this attack, but he did not stop. and the whip kick under his feet had already kicked over. Resist fire ring. Lin En's face did not change. As the magic power surged, flames ignited around his body, spreading in all directions without dead ends. The hot air waves rolled and swept everything around. Chapter 360 The first appearance of the eternal flame. The moment the flames started, Arno had already stopped, and in a posture that violated the human body structure, he avoided the attack directly with a speed faster than the flames. Although Arno had tried it just now, the method that Edwell told him was very effective, and the so-called hellfire was not as terrible as rumored, but these methods only suppressed it. As long as the place was contaminated by this kind of flame, it must be cut off and peeled off. If it is not necessary, he never wants these flames to be contaminated on his body. What a fast reaction speed! Lin En was secretly shocked. The cardinal in front of him was not the strongest opponent he had ever encountered, but he could definitely be described as difficult. Such speed and strength, combined with divine arts, can be said to be extremely threatening. If you face a great elemental wizard who is not proficient in close combat, if you are not careful, you may die on the spot. Although the situation is critical, Lin En did not rashly use the eternal fire and laser magic that he had as a bottom line. After all, both of these magics may cause large-scale destruction and accidental injuries, and the relevant intelligence is also very critical. Once used, it must be guaranteed to kill. While thinking, hundreds of magic missiles began to appear around him. Magic barrage is just an improved zero-ring magic, but the strength of the spell also depends on who the caster is. In Lin En's hands, it often has the power to turn decay into magic. Since the speed can't keep up, then win by quantity. As Lin En's mind turned, the surrounding magic missiles suddenly rushed out, forming a continuous barrage, blocking every direction of Arno's displacement. Do you want to use the same trick again? Arno, who had suffered a big loss once, did not dare to let these seemingly harmless magic creations approach this time. A terrifying air wave emerged around him, and the rapidly approaching magic missiles exploded before they got close. Fortunately, the electromagnetic field has been formed. Lin En raised his hand, a trace of lightning flashed at his fingertips, and with the help of the dense conductive elements in the air, he used the 5-ring magic beyond his level. Thunder prison, lightning storm. As lightning intertwined, the thunderstorm covered the entire area, and violent arcs of electricity flew out, constantly leaping in the air like a dense spider web. Although Arno was outside the electromagnetic field, the speed of lightning was too fast, and it spread to the surrounding area in an instant. In such a range, even with his speed, it was impossible to dodge. Arno's body immediately surged with a divine barrier, isolating the incoming lightning. With such continuous consumption, it was obviously not as good as he expected. A quick battle must be resolved. Realizing this, Arno no longer hesitated, stepped out suddenly, and his body left a residual image, and he actually took the initiative to break into the electromagnetic field. Red Dragon Breath. Facing Arno, who was rushing to kill, Lin En stepped back, and the hot fire stream quickly expanded, trying to force the opponent back with a large-scale fire magic. This time, Arno had no intention of avoiding it. He actually rushed forward against the scorching fire. The powerful and strange white phosphorus fire continued to devour the power of the divine magic barrier, and the heavy sword in Arno's hand had already slashed out. Everything happened in a flash. Lin En didn't seem to react, or he didn't expect that the other party would rush over like this. The heavy sword quickly pierced into his body and went through the abdomen. But at the moment when the heavy sword entered his body, Arno's pupils shrank slightly, because the feeling was wrong. It was not the cutting feeling brought by the sword entering the body. There was no panic or fear on the other party's face. At the same time, a hand had already firmly grasped his shoulder, and then the blazing eternal fire rushed out from Lin En's body, and the whole person turned directly into a ball of expanding fire, attacking Arno, who was close at hand. Divine Art, Guardian of the Earth. In 0.05 seconds, Arno only had time to use this divine art, and his white skin turned from the inside to the outside into a gray earth color. This 5-ring divine art, Guardian of the Earth, can build a solid stone shield on the surface of the body. With the blessing of the divine art, It is even enough to withstand the impact of some powerful spells. Arno didn't understand what burning objects and conductors were. But he knew one thing, that stones could not burn and could not conduct electricity, which was enough to minimize the damage of the opponent's two most threatening spells. However, he didn't know that Lin En was not using white phosphorus fire this time, but the more dangerous and more powerful eternal flame, chlorine trifluoride, an existence that can burn everything and plunder electrons crazily. Before, Lin En deliberately used white phosphorus to lure the enemy, creating an intelligence gap and waiting for this opportunity. The shrill scream suddenly resounded through the sky, and Arno screamed in pain. He could clearly feel the flames burning on his skin that had turned into stone, and even penetrated into his flesh and bones. Arno, after hearing the screams, person, who was fighting with Raphael, couldn't help but look over there. After forcing Raphael away with a holy light shock, he hurriedly cast a spell to rescue God's rain. The water mist containing the brilliance of divine magic immediately covered Arno's body. It was undoubtedly common sense to use water to put out fire. According to their previous estimates, this kind of hellfire could not be easily extinguished by water, but it was no problem to suppress it temporarily. However, the facts were completely opposite to what person expected. After the water mist touched Arno's body, the eternal fire attached to his body was not suppressed, but burst into a more violent flame. The roaring Arno exploded directly, turning into a sky full of minced meat and blood mist. Person was stunned for a moment, and couldn't believe that he did it. What about the water that could put out the fire? How could it explode directly? Lin En's figure appeared on the other side of the battlefield. He looked at Arno, who was blown into pieces, and then looked at Person, saying teasingly, "It seems that the Vatican is not a monolithic entity. I didn't expect you to be so cruel to your colleagues." Raphael rolled his eyes. He naturally knew that this was the characteristic of the eternal fire. If someone tried to extinguish it with water, they would be blown into a pile of mincemeat like Arno. Using the intelligence gap to directly kill a cardinal, Lin En also showed a smile at the corner of his mouth. Otherwise, if the opponent relies on his extraordinary speed to dodge, or continuously releases that sword energy from a distance, then it will not be easy for him to win. Chapter 361. Beware, feel the despair. This is the power of legend. The sudden change in the situation on the field also made the wizards watching in the Alchemy Research Institute pause. In just 1 or 2 seconds, they witnessed Arno wielding a heavy sword to split Lin En in half, and then being ignited by the spreading flames. And finally Person used magic to blow up the opponent. Could it be that their enemies were fighting among themselves? Yoland and others were a little confused for a while, but fortunately one thing was certain, it was now 2-1, and they had a great advantage. Under the vague encirclement of Lin En and Raphael, Person's face became more and more ugly, and he couldn't help but take a few steps back, but soon he felt as if he had hit an iron wall. Person turned his head suddenly, and then he found that, at some point, a duel, wearing a red and gold robe and an iron mask, had appeared behind him. Lord Duel. Person was both excited and terrified, and hurriedly explained, "Just now, Arno fell into the trap of these wizards and was hit by that weird hellfire. I just used divine magic to suppress this fire, but I didn't expect." Edwill raised his hand to stop Person's words of defense. He was nearby just now, so he naturally saw everything. The reason why he didn't take action directly was to guard against those legendary wizards who might appear. Moreover, neither Arno nor Person fell into a significant disadvantage in the battle. It was just that Edwill didn't expect the situation to change so quickly. Just after Person cast a spell to rescue him, Arno's whole body suddenly exploded, and he had no time to rescue him. This also meant that his previous analysis was wrong. No, it should be said that they were fooled, and the other party was now using the real hellfire. Arno's soul will live forever in heaven. Edwill whispered softly, then looked at Lin En and Raphael, and said indifferently, "And the blasphemers will fall into hell. The so-called heaven and hell are nothing but lies you used to fool those fools." Raphael sneered disdainfully and took the lead. As his mind turned, the elements in the field became extremely active, intertwined and collided with each other, and rushed towards the two cardinals in front of him. This is the 5-ring magic, elemental torrent. Edwell did not dodge or evade, and pointed his finger at the ground with an indifferent expression. "This place is the realm of God, and all evil will dissipate." As the voice fell, the entire space seemed to be shaking, and the sweeping elemental torrent was instantly dispersed by an inexplicable force. Then, a huge hymn sounded throughout the Alchemy Research Institute, and the land baked by flames was rejuvenated again. Strands of tender green grass leaves and vines were pulled out from the rubble and bricks, growing wildly, and bound the people who could not move. "Heaven, this is the kingdom of heaven!" A guard in the Capitol shouted frantically, with an extremely fanatical look on his face. Chapter 9 of the Bible, page 35. The messenger of God descended upon the earth, and wherever he passed, it became heaven, with flowers and brocade clusters. Such a scene of heaven and earth changes made Lin En's face become extremely solemn, and the flame swept around him, burning all the green plants that emerged from the surface. This is definitely not a power that an ordinary cardinal can possess. Legend? Raphael shouted in horror. "In the name of God, you are all sinners and blasphemers. You should kneel down and pray, and beg for God's forgiveness." Edwell's voice resounded again. Everyone present felt their bodies sink, and immediately knelt on the ground, and could only support their bodies with their limbs. As a former wizard like Pierce, the oppression he felt was even stronger, and he even lay on the ground. Now, the only two people standing, besides the believers who were not affected, were Lin En and Raphael. The pressure they were under was even greater than that of the former wizards. Lin En suddenly felt as if his body had sunk into the deep sea. The heavy water pressure from all directions seemed to crush his body. The elemental field that originally surrounded him within a range of 15 meters had also shrunk to 3 meters. The elements inside had completely lost control and became dull and scattered. "Is this a legend?" Lin En's pupils shrank slightly. They had lost the ability to resist after just one encounter. "Judgment, punishment by sword and axe," Edwell said in a cold tone. The Bible, chapter 11, page 16. "Those who speak evil words and blaspheme against God shall be punished by sword and axe, and their souls shall be thrown into hell." In the empty void, dozens of spirit guards holding swords and axes appeared immediately. They could not see their faces and chopped at Lin En and Raphael's heads, chests, and limbs. The two men, suppressed by an inexplicable force and unable to even move, watched the sword and axe blade approaching rapidly. Raphael's forehead was covered with cold sweat. He did not expect that the gap between him and the legend was so big. Lin En was not willing to be killed. With his outstanding perception, he soon realized that his control over the elements was not completely lost, but just became extremely slow. "Connect me to the magic network. Full power," Lin En shouted in his mind, and then felt that his brain seemed to explode, and his mental power was rising rapidly. 4 rings, 5 rings, 6 rings. The ratings in the database kept jumping. After breaking through the Great Wizard, Lin En distributed the Ring of Mysticism to many wizards of the Yata school. Now the total number of wizards connected to the magic network has exceeded 50, most of whom are former wizards. Of course, the computing power of these people alone is far from enough to support his mental power to directly jump 2 levels. What is really important is that the wizards connected to the magic network also include the legendary speaker, Ruff. Although the other party had only entered the magic field once, the analysis progress was very slow, but after 2 years of unremitting efforts, it also reached 5%. The intelligent brain faithfully executed Lin En's order and mobilized everyone's computing power. The sudden surge of mental power obviously burst Lin En's brain, which was a very strange feeling. Because the brain's thinking and computing ability is based on the neural network, this thing did not suddenly increase or decrease, and it was impossible to physically burst the brain. This time Lin En felt more clearly that his body could not bear the consumption required by the huge computing power, and every cell seemed to be groaning in pain. But now is obviously not the time to consider these. With the surge of mental power, Lin En immediately sensed that the elements in the surrounding area have regained their vitality. "Fire!" Lin En spit out a word, and the strange immortal flame ignited again, swallowing up all of the dozens of spirit guards who were approaching. Chapter 362 God in the physical sense, Laplace's demon. After saving Raphael, Lin En aimed at Edwell, The surge in mental power and the deterrence brought by the enemy made Lin En no longer deliberately limit the amount and power of chlorine trifluoride. The flames continued to surge and proliferate in the void, condensing into fireballs the size of a human head and flying towards Edwell. Facing this strange eternal flame, Edwell did not dare to neglect it and raised his hand. Sand, metal, water curtain. The divine barrier composed of materials that could block the flames blocked in front of him. However, it was all in vain. Any material began to disintegrate the moment it came into contact with the eternal flame, turning into nutrients for the flames and pressing over with even greater power. After confirming again that what he had just seen was not an illusion, Edwell immediately raised the deterrence of this flame by several levels, and spoke very quickly before the overwhelming eternal flame came to him. The gods have erected a high wall between hell and the human world, which will block all evil and will never break. After the words fell, a golden high wall immediately appeared in front of him, forming a solid defensive barrier. The wall was engraved with complex and mysterious divine patterns, exuding an ancient and sacred atmosphere. The erected high wall blocked the strange and terrifying eternal flame. Edwell soon noticed that even the sacred wall that suppressed hell could not completely resist this flame, but the erosion speed became extremely slow. Lin En was also a little surprised. It was the first time he saw something that could effectively block chlorine trifluoride, a wall made entirely of the purest divine magic. As long as there are no electrons, chlorine trifluoride naturally cannot turn this substance into nutrients. Lin En immediately thought of this. Edwell accidentally found a way to temporarily block the eternal flame, which was also the information he had always wanted to hide. But Lin En did not pin all his hopes on this one magic. As the high wall rose, a thunderball with a diameter of several meters appeared above the head. The strong light continued to radiate around, turning midnight into daylight. Gather. Lin En pointed to the sacred wall covered by the sea of fire, and a series of reflection layers immediately appeared around the thunderball, enveloping all the light. The distance of about 50 meters almost pushed the power of laser magic to its limit, and with the help of a huge mental power brought by the magic network connection, Lin En also raised the laser beam to the 4th energy level in one fell swoop. The radius was compressed to 0.1 millimeters. "Open it for me," Lin En shouted vigorously, and a tiny crack appeared in the closed reflection layer. The extremely strong beam of light crossed the sea of fire at a speed of 300,000 kilometers per second and hit the indestructible sacred wall. The wall constructed by divine energy was originally slowly disintegrating under the melting of the flames. Facing the more powerful laser magic, it was like leather cut by a sharp weapon, and soon it broke layer by layer. Sensing this, Edwell's face changed greatly. But the speed of light was too fast. Before he could react, it pierced through the sacred wall and penetrated through his chest. "Cut!" Lin En shouted again. The beam that pierced Edwell's body swept upwards in an instant, passing through his chest, neck and brain, and splitting the whole person in two. Not only that, the laser beam with an almost infinite length also cut through the high walls of the courtyard and several burning mansions in the distance, and flew straight into the sky. "Lord Edwell!" Person shouted in horror. The beam came too fast and too fast. The moment he saw it, Edwell had been cut in half, and the broken body fell to the ground. Lin En kept panting. Whether it was controlling the eternal fire on a large scale or raising the laser to the 4th energy level, the magic power and mental power consumed were not a small number. But before Lin En could breathe a sigh of relief, Edwell's voice rang again. "In the name of the Lord, everything that has disappeared will reappear." An inexplicable force swept through the entire space, and the broken bodies on the ground suddenly disappeared without a trace. The grass and trees on the ground that were burned out by the flames grew again, and the cracks in the courtyard wall that were cut off in the distance healed quickly. It was as if time had flowed backwards. 5 seconds later, everything returned to its original state, and Edwell appeared in front of everyone intact. "What kind of magic is this? Words come true? Time goes back?" A trace of unknown fear rose in Lin's heart. The power displayed by Edwell exceeded the worst-case scenario he had imagined before. Even injuries like cutting off the brain could not kill the other party. Or was it that he was resurrected after death? What's more tricky is that Lin has no idea where this ability that is almost as powerful as words comes from. and he can actually do something like time going back, although this is not impossible in physics. According to the hypothesis that was more popular in the previous life, time is the embodiment of the movement and change of matter. In theory, if we can know the position and momentum of all atoms at a point in time, we can predict the future and even turn back time to the past. This is the so-called Laplace demon, the God in the physical sense. Omniscience is omnipotence. But this is obviously impossible. The universe is so big that it is simply a fantasy to want to know the position of all atoms. Wait. Record the position and momentum of atoms. Magic mimicry. The realm of the kingdom of God. Lin En suddenly realized something. His mind turned, and he immediately had a guess in his heart. Dean Lin En, what he said just now should be the sentences in the Bible. Pierce, who was still pressed to the ground and unable to move, reminded loudly. After occupying the capital and destroying the local church, they seized a large number of Bible manuscripts. Pierce also looked through them curiously. He read this thing as a storybook and understood it. So Pierce was very sure that every sentence that Edwell said just now had a corresponding one in the Bible. Without exception, Lin En immediately understood that this ability to make things happen with words was not entirely the power of the other party. The source of power came from the projection of the kingdom of God. Everything here, whether it was the overgrown grass, land, or buildings, had been infected by divine power. Their positions and states were all under the control of the master of the kingdom of God, that, Allah, who was able to achieve omniscience and omnipotence in a certain direction and do such outrageous things as reversing time. But Boyer obviously did not have this ability, and could only use divine words similar to passwords to mobilize the power of the projection of the kingdom of God to a certain extent. Chapter 363 All living beings will prostrate themselves before the Creator and accept His judgment. Complex thoughts flashed through Lin En's mind. Although he roughly guessed the source of the opponent's power, how to deal with it was still a very difficult problem, not to mention that the opponent seemed to have the ability to be immortal or resurrected. While thinking, Lin En did not stop his actions. The focusing magic suspended above his head was activated again. The strong laser swept across and cut off all the high walls, buildings and trees in the courtyard. Edwell's figure twisted and disappeared directly on the spot, avoiding the cutting of the laser. Although his speed was not as fast as light, it was far faster than the speed of the focusing magic. Lin En let go of his perception and looked for the opponent's traces in all directions. However, there were fluctuations of divine magic all around, and his mental power could not leave the scope of his own domain. God created the earth and the sky, and sinners will not be able to stand on the ground. Edwell's voice rang out in the space. The ground beneath their feet immediately cracked and turned into sticky black mud. Lin's legs immediately sank. Not only that, a pair of bony hands emerged from the mud and firmly grasped his thighs, as if trying to drag him into the mud. At some point, the Boyer had already arrived behind Lin. He stretched out his right hand, and a strong divine power wave appeared in his palm. But he stopped the action the next second, stepped back a few steps, and narrowly avoided the flying disintegration ray. The person who made the move was Raphael. As the leader of the five-ring magic, the disintegration ray can even tear steel into pieces in an instant, and even the Boyer dared not resist it head-on. Since Lin was bearing most of the pressure in front, the Boyer did not have much energy to focus on them. So after struggling for a while, Raphael successfully regained control of part of the domain, but he had been holding back until now when he suddenly made a move at the critical moment. The only pity was that the Boyer still easily avoided his attack. Fortunately, the sudden change also made Lin En react. The dazzling laser shot out, and Edwell's figure disappeared again. As Lin En's mind turned, the eerie immortal flames appeared around him, and the white bone hand that emerged from the quagmire was immediately burned and turned into nutrients for the flames. Then the surging waves of fire surged in all directions. Since he couldn't find Edwell's location, he would burn everything here and directly destroy the foundation of his opponent's power. If the real owner of the kingdom of God's projection was here, Lin En would naturally not dare to make such a delusion. But the person who was controlling it at this moment was not an omniscient and omnipotent God. As for the ability similar to time reversal, he never believed that it was not consumed. Otherwise Edwell would not need to avoid their attacks at all. Under Lin En's full drive, the horror of the immortal fire soon revealed itself, and everything around was involved, whether it was houses, high walls, grass, soil, or even the dust in the air was ignited. In just a few breaths, the entire Alchemy Research Institute turned into a sea of fire. The place where Raphael, Alok and others were staying was surrounded by flames, but this level of control was already the limit. Lin En couldn't even spare more energy to suppress the highly toxic gas produced by the combustion. He could only let the chlorine trifluoride plunder electrons crazily, producing a continuous stream of flames, strong light and high temperature, filling the entire space. Now defeating Edwell has become the top priority, otherwise all of them will die here today. The terrifying flames quickly eroded the coverage of the entire projection of the kingdom of God, and Edwell's figure also appeared in the flames, with a ring-shaped shield around him, composed of pure divine arts. In the battle just now, he had seen that only pure divine energy could be immune to the characteristics of the eternal flame that devoured everything to a certain extent. Of course, the high temperature and destructiveness of the flame itself are still powerful. The most important thing is that he can't find any way to extinguish this flame. Sand, metal, water mist, these traditional methods of extinguishing the flames have completely lost their effect, and even isolating the air cannot prevent it from spreading. Edwell keenly noticed that the space around him had begun to shake and collapse. After all, this was only a part of the projection, not the real kingdom of God. The power that supported its arrival was being devoured and stripped away by the flames. Person, who was also caught in the sea of fire, could only hide behind Edwell in fear, watching the rising eternal flame from the outside world gradually erode the divine magic barrier around him. Person knew very well what would happen if he was infected with this kind of flame. The death of Arnold was the best proof. Lord Edwell, seeing that the flames had already invaded the barrier, Person shouted anxiously. The hesitant Edwell finally made up his mind that he must get rid of this enemy of the church. The other party has mastered these two magics that are enough to threaten him before he has stepped into that level. In the future, they will definitely become their biggest obstacle. When the day of judgment comes, the gate of heaven will open, the Lord will sit on the throne, and all living beings will prostrate themselves before the Creator to accept the Lord's judgment. Edwell's expression became more solemn. With each word he spoke, his face turned a little paler, and the divine power in his body surged wildly. In the dark, some kind of sacred and vast power was attracted. Lin En also noticed the terrible fluctuation of the divine art. At the moment Edwell opened his mouth, he confirmed his position and slashed the beam of light that gathered into a point again. However, a bronze door had already appeared in front of Edwell. The laser beam that could easily penetrate the sacred wall and cut the house into two sections could not leave any traces on this door. This is the legendary divine art, Gate of Heaven. The door leads to the real kingdom of God, the realm of God. In the entire Vatican, only a few high-level officials such as the Pope and the Chief Judge have the qualifications to use this divine art, because the caster needs to use his own divine power as an anchor to guide and support the coming of the Gate of Heaven. In the past hundreds of years, there have been only 4 records of using this divine art. While using the supreme divine power of the Lord to destroy powerful alien demons and evil gods, he will also be severely damaged. Even with the power of legend, it is difficult to maintain such a huge consumption, and there is even a risk of falling from the realm. This is the Gate of Heaven. Poulsen was both excited, and he immediately knelt down and prayed without paying any attention to the surging immortal flames around him. Chapter 364 The True God is Coming. The bronze door turned from virtual to real, standing in the courtyard filled with the eternal fire, as if it had existed since ancient times. The huge power made Raphael and others who were dozens of meters away feel terrified. The eternal flames burning around surged up instantly, greedily trying to swallow the Gate of Heaven, but the flames seemed to be affected by some kind of power, and showed a clear sense of distortion after approaching the door. Lin En, who was trying to control the raging sea of fire, soon realized that it was not the flames that were distorted, but the entire space. The huge door was like a star. It stood there, and the surrounding time and space were changed, accompanied by a sound like a huge bell. the bronze door opened a crack, and a terrifying pressure condensed in the void, and the ethereal hymn sounded in everyone's ears. Lin En's expression was extremely solemn. Just a door leading to heaven showed the ability to distort time and space and resist the fourth-level laser technique. He couldn't imagine how powerful it would be once the true God came. However, the two most powerful magics he mastered, laser and immortal flame, could not destroy the door. Now he could only take a gamble. Lin En knew that his only hope was to take advantage of the situation. The immortal flame devoured a large amount of power from the projection of the kingdom of God, stripping away all the electrons of the elements that transformed the divine power. Now it has become part of the flame, scattered throughout the courtyard, forming a terrifying but uncontrolled electric field. It is not easy to use such a disordered and powerful force, but with the support of the computing power of dozens of wizards, the impossible has become possible. Lin En raised his hand, and a solid iron ball appeared in the void and condensed, and then flashing arcs surged around his body. Although the electromagnetic railgun has the disadvantage of a long accumulation time, it is even better than the laser beam in terms of destructive power. Even so, it must reach 40 times the speed of sound to break the space-time vortex around the gate of heaven. Lin En bet everything on this attack. The magic power in his body had already been consumed in the battle. Now he was mobilizing all the magic power stored in the magic net. The plundered electrons gathered quickly, but the speed of the electromagnetic railgun was far slower than the speed of the door opening. Edwell also felt the terrible magic fluctuations blocked by the sea of fire. He neither paid attention to it nor could he stop it, because all his strength was invested in supporting the arrival of the gate of heaven. As long as the two realms are opened and a channel is created for the true God to descend, all the resistance of the enemy will be in vain. Suddenly, Edwell's face changed suddenly and he turned his head abruptly, because he suddenly sensed that the domain formed by the projection of the kingdom of God was cut off from the outside world. Unlike the cutting in the real sense like the laser beam cast by Lin En, this was actually a destruction at the spatial level. The entire space trembled violently, and the black line spread rapidly in the projection of the kingdom of God filled with flames. Everything along the way was rapidly disintegrating. This was the deepest darkness formed by the light being caught in the vortex of space and unable to reflect. This was the legendary magic of the force field system, blade of space and time. The one who came was the legendary speaker Earth. In a flash, the invisible blade of space slashed directly at the gate of the kingdom of heaven, and the huge space vortex caused the domain projected by the kingdom of God to disintegrate. The originally solid door also became a little lighter, but the door was already half open. "Go back," a dull voice sounded in the courtyard, and a series of complex runes appeared in the void, just like a chain wrapped around the bronze door, trying to force the open gap to close. But the next moment, the indifferent look on the face of magic creator Vittorio became nervous, and he shouted hurriedly, "I can't hold it back any longer, Trev. Hurry up and destroy it." The energy contained in the gate of heaven far exceeded his expectations. It was obvious that the master of the kingdom of God had noticed this channel connecting the two worlds and was sending power to it. Trev did not dare to neglect it and used all his strength to launch the force field magic, preparing to tear this so-called gate of heaven apart completely. The two forces intertwined with each other, and the powerful space turbulence made the surging sea of fire around even more violent. At the same time, Lin En's magic was also completed. Super electromagnetic railgun. The iron ball bound by the magnetic force suddenly accelerated, and under the influence of the lightning, it turned into a red stream of light and flew out. The huge sonic boom directly dispersed the rolling flames nearby. 40 times the speed of sound came in an instant. Under the gaze of everyone who was expectant, surprised, or nervous, the red iron ball hit the bronze door fiercely. Boom! A violent explosion sounded on the bronze door, the surface cracked, and the strong shockwave made the sea of fire retreat dozens of meters. An extremely hot air wave surged in the void, and everyone present felt a burning pain on their skin, as if they were burned by the flames. Everyone stared at the gate of heaven in front of them. A long crack appeared on the surface of the door, covering 1/3 of the door leaf. That was where the electromagnetic cannon hit. But the damage was limited to this. The bronze door still stood upright in place. The alchemical runes that bound the surface had collapsed, and a white palm stretched out from the inside of the door. A chill rose in everyone's heart. Even Herve and Vittorio were no exception. When they were in the wizard's land, they thought that as long as several legends were present, they would have the strength to fight even if they faced the goddess directly. But now they couldn't muster up the slightest confidence. "Lord, your most devout believer prays that you will bring down the judgment," person shouted excitedly. A smile also appeared on the face of Edwell, but the smile on his face soon froze, because a long sword composed of flames and atomic beams pierced through their bodies from behind. Because most of the power was used to maintain the arrival of the gate of heaven, the divine magic barrier around the body had already become weak and could only barely resist the invasion of the eternal flame. And Lin En drew out the last bit of energy, controlled the flames near Edwell, and launched the most deadly raid. As long as the caster is killed, the power supplying the spell will disappear. The domain constructed by the projection of the kingdom of God had already collapsed in the battle just now, which means that the opponent can no longer use the word of God to reverse death. The flames quickly infected and spread to Edwell's whole body in just 1 second, madly devouring every bit of power in his body. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 365 The Power of God, the Eternal Flame that was destroyed. The Bible Sinners, page 5, Chapter 7, All blasphemers will sink into purgatory, and in the roasting of the hellfire, their flesh and bones will be burned, and their souls will fall into the sea of fire forever until they are annihilated. Under the burning of the flames, Edwell's mind suddenly remembered the description of the fire of hell in the Bible. It is rumored that this kind of flame can burn everything, even the human soul. Anyone who is infected with it will die in the most painful posture. In the past, Edwell never thought that one day he would be the one to experience the punishment of purgatory. The flames were even more terrible than the rumors. While licking and dissolving the skin and flesh, they also drilled into the body from the mouth, nose, and ears, constantly eroding every cell and every bone in the body. The sudden change in the situation on the field was beyond everyone's expectations. While person's excited expression remained on his face, Edwell beside him had been set on fire. The door standing in the courtyard also trembled violently. The energy that provides a god to travel between the two worlds is extremely huge. Once the supplier, Edwell, is lost, this door to heaven will no longer be able to continue. Herve and Vittorio also realized this immediately. The most important thing now is that they must not let the other party walk out of the door. Seal. Vittorio changed his handprints, and the complex alchemical runes flashing with magical fluorescence were connected together, turning into a silver chain that locked the door from all directions. Herve was also merciless. The force field magic was activated again, covering the entire space, and he was trying to tear the door of heaven together with the false god whose half of his body had passed through the door. The surging eternal flame around was also rolled over under Lin's control. Through the firelight, Lin En stared at the figure that was about to step out of the door. Her body seemed to be shrouded in light and fog, and her appearance was hazy and unclear. She exuded a vast and sacred aura, as if she was the source of everything, making people want to get close, kneel down, crawl in front of her and offer everything they have. The silver chain, the tearing of space, and the violent immortal flames arrived in front of her almost at the same time. The pair of star-like eyes were indifferent and cold. The god who walked out of the gate of heaven stretched out a slender jade finger and tapped the void. The next moment, a strong divine light appeared. Under the sweep of the invisible power, the alchemical runes that were entangled in a ring and flashing with magic light suddenly condensed, and even the surging sea of fire was frozen in place. That's right, it was frozen. It was like the video had paused. Everything around stopped in place. Even the whistling flames stopped in the void for a moment, then quickly melted and dissipated. For the first time, the eternal flame was extinguished. Time stopped. Lin En's heart was shocked, and his face showed horror. But he quickly rejected this. No, it's not time that stops. This is absolute zero. Where the divine light covers, the movement of all elements is almost stagnant, and they are broken up into the original magic. The essence of flames is high-temperature gaseous or plasma substances, and temperature is a manifestation of the average kinetic energy between molecules in an object. The molecules collide with each other, create and transfer heat. The greater the kinetic energy, the more violent the movement, the higher the temperature. On the other hand, when the movement of molecules almost stops, the high temperature and flames will naturally cease to exist. This is pseudo-time and space stillness, absolute zero. Although Lin En didn't think that he could be invincible by relying on chlorine trifluoride, after all, no matter how powerful it was just a chemical element. But he didn't expect that the other party would actually use this method to crack it. Simple and direct, even more frightening. The threshold of absolute zero is minus 273.15 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, all the kinetic energy and potential energy of molecules will disappear. It is a value that is praised as always being approached and can never be reached. But, Ella, did it. The kingdom of God expanded rapidly, and everything froze wherever it went. Vittorio, who was standing in the front, had set up protection before the divine light passed. The nearly materialized alchemical runes formed a circular protective barrier, condensing into frost, and Raphael behind him was directly frozen into an ice cube without any resistance. Lin En retreated step by step. Compared with the expanding kingdom of God, his speed was not worth mentioning at all. The magic barrier around him was condensing and disintegrating, and his arm vaguely felt this terrifying chill. At this moment, the dazzling divine light suddenly disappeared without a trace, and the elements that were forcibly frozen in the space regained their vitality. The bronze door standing in the center of the courtyard also disappeared. If it weren't for the frostbite on his arm and the ground covered with frost, people would even doubt whether everything before was an illusion. Lin En was stunned on the spot, and it took a while for him to react that Deadwell was dead. With his death, the power that maintained the arrival of the gate of heaven completely disappeared, and Ella, who came across the border from an unknown region, was also expelled. A sound of ice breaking came over, but it was Vittorio who broke the frost covering the protective barrier. After looking around, a sense of joy of surviving a disaster rose in his heart. I didn't expect the gap between us and her to be so big. Herve sighed and said, his face was not good. According to his previous estimate, even if he couldn't beat her, he should at least have the strength to fight. However, now the facts have proved that it is difficult for them to block the opponent's casual attack even if they respond with all their strength. Vittorio shook his head. The church had dominated this continent for more than 800 years. With a population of tens of millions, how could they easily defeat it? Unlike the wizards who were celebrating, person, who had witnessed everything but was still alive, was dumbfounded and fell into an extremely embarrassing situation. The expelled god did not take him away, and Deadwell had been burned to ashes. That was to say, now he was alone facing two legendary wizards and an enemy of the church who could manipulate the fire of hell and dared to attack the gods. Person swallowed hard, and silently wanted to cast a divine spell for a last stand, but the next second he felt a pain in his body. His hands and feet were cut off by the flying blade of time and space. A large amount of blood sprayed out. It was obvious that Herve had vented all his anger on the cardinal. He only spared his life for the sake of obtaining intelligence. Chapter 366, The Eternal Flame Spreading to the Capital. Noticing that Herve had already taken action and dealt with the only enemy in the courtyard, Lin En relaxed his heart and silently chanted, "Interrupt the magic network." In his mind, the surge of mental power disappeared instantly, and his body shook violently, almost falling to the ground. Vittorio, who was standing by, hurried forward to support Lin En, thinking that he was hit by the last magic spell cast by Ella, until he used magic to detect it and found that it was not the case. But the situation was equally serious, because he ate well and drank well in the wizard's land, and did not fall behind in exercise. Lin En's body shape has always been very good, but now he has lost a lot of weight, like a homeless person who has been hungry for several days and nights. The magic power in his body has been completely consumed, and his mental power has been severely damaged. Vittorio's face darkened slightly. Combined with the electromagnetic cannon that Lin En had just released, which had reached the legendary level of magic, he quickly guessed that this should be the sequelae of some magic that can increase combat power in a short period of time. He immediately took out a bottle of dark blue magic potion and poured it into the drowsy Lin En. The cold liquid rolled down his throat into his stomach, exuding a piercing chill. It rushed up all the way, and the pain in his brain was immediately relieved to a certain extent. But then another bottle of red potion was poured into his mouth. His cold body instantly became extremely hot, as if he was thrown into a boiling pot. Under this interweaving of ice and fire, Lin En shivered and couldn't help but take a breath of cool air. He immediately became energetic, but his body still felt very tired, like the sluggishness after intense exercise. You'd better not use magic in the near future. Take another bottle of High Blizzard every day, otherwise it may cause irreparable damage, Vittorio reminded him. Although he was very curious about what kind of magic could cause such serious sequelae, he was still sensible and didn't ask more questions. For wizards, magical knowledge is particularly precious, and sometimes it is far more important than life. The great wizards are embarrassed to show up without one or two magic tricks in their back box. After all, they have a lot of time and powerful strength to study various magic theories. The latest research results are often highly confidential before they are perfected. Even the power of many spells lies in their own unknown. Once the intelligence is analyzed, it is easy for the enemy to study the method of cracking. This also leads to the extremely poor circulation of hiring magic models. They are often only communicated between familiar great wizards and exchanged with each other with magic knowledge. He just hopes that Lin En doesn't use any witchcraft that will reduce his lifespan and consume his potential. Thinking of this, Vittorio sighed, because this is very likely. After all, this increase is too exaggerated. I understand, thank you, Lord Vittorio. Lin En rubbed his head, which was still aching, and said gratefully, if he had fainted just now, he might have been brain dead or turned into a vegetable. Because this time the computing power increase provided by the magic network link completely exceeded the upper limit of his ability. According to the previous calculations by the intelligent brain, it is relatively safe to use the magic network to double the computing power and reach the level of a 5-ring wizard. Once it exceeds the limit, there will be a risk of severe mental damage. This is why Lin En did not rush to incorporate a large number of wizards into the magic network system. Fortunately, there are convenient things like magic potions. Lin En can naturally recognizes that Vittorio gave him the legendary magic potions, Full Moon of Isra, and Water of Life, both of which are impossible to buy on the market. The former is the best mental recovery potion, which can even repair the trauma of the soul, while Water of Life can reconnect broken limbs and allow a dying person to recover within 3 minutes. However, even if these two magic potions are taken together, they cannot completely eliminate the sequelae caused by connecting to the magic network. On the other side, rescue the frozen Raphael as soon as possible after dealing with person. How is Master Raphael? Lin En forced himself to support the fatigue of his body, looking at Raphael who had lost consciousness on the ground, like a dead body, and asked worriedly, there's still a breath left. The Water of Life should be able to save him. Rav sensed it and said thankfully, since he was frozen for a short time, he could still be saved. If it was longer, he would be dead. Vittorio's painful expression clearly appeared on his face. He took out another bottle of scarlet potion and gave it to Raphael to drink. The materials for these legendary potions are not easy to find. It can be said that the more you use, the less you have. The birth of each bottle of legendary potion means the fall of a powerful monster. The shouts and roars of artillery outside the city are still resounding, but on one hand, they need to protect Lin and Raphael, who are patients, and on the other hand, they need to clean up the mess left after the battle. Neither Herv nor Vittorio can spare a hand to help, because they still have to face a big trouble. That is the eternal flame that has spread outside the courtyard. Lin En's inability to use magic means that these things have completely lost control. If he doesn't find a way to extinguish them, The fire may spread to the entire capital. Tell me, how to put this thing out? After trying the vacuum isolation method and failing, Purv was too lazy to try again and looked directly at Lin En. To be honest, I don't have any good ideas. Generally speaking, I use magic to peel off the things it is attached to and wait for it to burn out. Lin En shrugged. It can react with any known element. In particular, don't use water to extinguish it, otherwise it will explode and be highly toxic. Purv looked at Lin En with a strange expression. There was no effective solution, but he dared to use it on such a large scale. This was a strategy of mutual destruction. Could it really come from hell? Vittorio couldn't help but ask. After all, this is very similar to the characteristics of the hellfire in the Bible, which burns everything and burns everything. How is it possible? This is just a special synthetic element. Lin En shook his head, but then thought that the so-called hellfire might also be a similar thing. Ella, it must have been used to punish blasphemers, so it was recorded in the Bible and mentioned repeatedly. I just don't know which one is more powerful than chlorine trifluoride. It's not that there is no solution. For example, that person can extinguish it by stopping the movement of the element. Lin En added, and then looked at the two speakers expectantly. Chapter 367, Missing Aurora and the Clarion Call for Counterattack. Then let's give it a try. At Lin's suggestion, Purv and Vittorio immediately spread their domains, covering the area where the eternal flame was burning, and tried to stop it. However, this process was more difficult than everyone thought. The two legendary wizards worked together for more than half an hour to completely stop the spread of the eternal flame. Although manipulating elements is considered the wizard's specialty, it does not mean that they have 100% control over the elements. The precision that wizards at each level can achieve is different. For example, the control of elements by formal wizards can only be called influence, and their mental power cannot reach metal elements and composite elements. In comparison, the great wizards are obviously much more powerful and can realize the command of mimic elements in their own domain, but that is limited to this. They can make elements speed up, slow down, or go left and back, but they can't do the incredible thing like, Ella, to stop the movement of all elements and form a time and space freeze. Any element is in motion all the time, even if it changes from gas to liquid or even solid in the macro state. This movement will not stop. Lin En had tried it before. Once the threshold is crossed, which is about -200 degrees, the magic power and mental power consumed for each degree of decrease will increase exponentially. As for whether the legendary wizard has this ability, Lin En is not sure, but judging from the response of the two speakers, it is probably impossible to do such an exaggerated thing. Otherwise it would not take so long to extinguish the flame derived from chlorine trifluoride. The goddess froze the eternal flame with just a raise of her hand. While Purv and Vittorio were busy putting out the fire, Lin En and others were not idle either, because in addition to them, there were hundreds of people in the Alchemy Research Institute, but they could not intervene at all, and were tortured to death by the range magic cast by Edwell. Even some of the guards, after being illuminated by the divine light, had been completely brainwashed and became the most devout believers of Ella. Lin En could only knock them all out with his fists and tie them up, and then find a way to change their ideas. By the way, Lord Huv, didn't you say before that you would arrive at the capital as soon as possible? Why did you delay for so long? Lin En suddenly remembered this matter and asked in confusion. If Huv hadn't arrived by coincidence this time, they would probably be dead, and the entire kingdom would fall. I was just about to ask you, hasn't Aurora arrived yet? Huv frowned. As early as a week ago, after discussion, the parliament had passed a motion to fully support the Hadjarata kingdom, and Aurora led a new army to go there first. They traveled by land and sea. After all, most of the airships were mobilized by Lin En, and the transportation capacity was far from enough. After the alchemy ships in the wizard land were replaced with internal combustion engines, their speed was not slow. It took about 4 or 5 days to cross the sea from the wizard land to the kingdom. Calculating the time, Aurora should have arrived at the capital long ago, but the spies I sent out didn't see her. Lin En shook his head and said worriedly, could something have happened? Now is an emergency period. Disappearance may mean danger or even death. Maybe she got lost. or encountered some trouble at sea and was delayed, Vittorio said comfortingly. In terms of combat power, Aurora is not the strongest among them, but in terms of the ability to save her life, he and Rav are inferior. The other party has played polarization magic to a great extent. Even if he encounters the blockade of the Holy See, retreat is always no problem. In short, it's not too late to destroy this coalition of the Holy See first, and then dispatch personnel to search. Rav quickly made a decision. Even if Aurora encountered any danger, it was too late to provide support now. The most urgent task was to win the war, and then more than 100 airships could be dispatched to search, which would be more efficient than wandering around the vast ocean like headless flies. At the same time, at the gate of the royal capital, the sound of artillery fire and swords clashing rang out continuously. After several hours of fierce fighting, from late at night to early morning, everyone's physical strength and energy had been exhausted. Ham replaced a dead gunner, relying on his will, mechanically loaded the projectiles, ignited and fired, and then carried out the next round of shooting. Those crazy coalition soldiers were like crazy, surging like a tide, and never retreated in the face of the invasion of artillery fire, and did not give them time to rest. The bricks and stones on the city wall were beaten to pieces, and even the closed city gate was blasted into pieces by the magic, revealing the solid cement wall behind. The broken bodies below were piled up like a mountain, even filling up the trenches and traps dug before the war. Some of them were from the enemy, and some were from our own people. Just when Ham was mechanically loading the bullets numbly and felt that his hands were about to break from exhaustion, a clear horn sounded from the city. Ham suddenly shuddered, and his face showed obvious excitement, because it was the horn of the promised counterattack. Outside the city, about 1.5 kilometers away from the battlefield, beyond the range of the artillery, a cavalry regiment with refined equipment and more than 10,000 people was ready to go. Although this battle was the final decisive battle, the Cardinal Jerk in charge of the command did not invest all his strength. The knights who were not suitable for siege stayed outside the city, waiting for the place where the artillery could not reach, just to make a concerted effort at the right time and completely defeat the exhausted and demoralized enemy. And this time will never be too far away, because Idweir personally led more than 2,000 God's punishment army through the secret passage into the royal capital, and was assisted by the Dark Guards. As long as the frontal battlefield continues to attack, without giving these wizards a chance to come back for help, the fall of the capital is only a matter of time. Is this the power of the Lord? Suddenly, a cardinal sensed the strong divine brilliance in the capital and became excited, but this power came and disappeared quickly. Before he could carefully investigate, it had already disappeared. It seems that the evil god believers in the city have been killed. The surrounding bishops are also very sure of this. Although the minions of the evil god are very tenacious and resist their rounds of offensive, all resistance is futile under the power of the Lord. The facts seem to be just as they expected. With the piercing sound of the horn, the sound of artillery fire on the city wall suddenly stopped, and the city gate that was tightly closed and still stood firm under the bombardment of divine magic was finally opened. Chapter 368, Steel Torrent, the Armored Vehicle's Debut. At the moment the city gate opened, the knights who were ready to go launched a charge at the sound of the order. Rumble the huge horse hooves stepped on the ground, splashing a cloud of dust. The knights, wearing iron armor and holding spears, rushed into the wide-open city like a surging dark cloud. For the glory of the Lord, kill those blasphemers! The roars were deafening, and the roars like wild beasts rolled out. They were particularly loud in the morning light, as if they wanted to tear everything apart. The leader was Jirg, who was wearing black armor and holding a giant scimitar. He had been watching the fierce battlefield for a long time and had been patient to the extreme. After receiving the order, the blood in his heart burned. The big knife in his hand had been thirsty for a long time, and he was eager to cut off the heads of those blasphemers and use the blood of those wizards to please the great moon goddess. However, unlike what they expected, what came out of the city gate was not the god's punishment army that came to greet them, nor the ragged and fleeing people, but a group of strange-looking iron boxes more than 2 meters tall, with a thick and long pipe in front. Is it a new thing developed by those wizards? Jirk frowned, and vaguely felt something wrong in his heart, but the cavalry's momentum could not be stopped. All they could do was charge, and charge again. "God is with me," Dirk shouted loudly. The light of divine arts flashed around him, and then condensed on the long sword in his hand. He believed that the power given by God was enough to tear everything apart. However, they had no chance to get close at all, because the thick and long gun barrel soon emitted bursts of roars. Facing the flying shells, Dirk realized that the iron boxes in front of him were actually movable artillery. "Break it!" Dirk roared and swung the long sword in his hand, which was shining with the glory of divine magic, and went straight to meet the rapidly approaching projectile. The next moment, the long sword and the projectile collided with each other. Amid the roar and the neighing of the warhorse, Dirk's blow actually cut the artillery fire in half. The knights in the back were not so lucky. They could not stop the galloping projectiles. Dozens of knights screamed, and their armor was directly penetrated. The powerful impact broke their bodies in two, and the remains were smashed dozens of meters away. Dirk's eyes were red, and he swung the long sword in his hand again. The sharp sword energy hit the iron armor, creating a dent and causing the entire alchemy vehicle to shake violently, but it continued to move forward without stopping. The thick gun barrel also made a deafening explosion again. At the same time as the gunfire, there was also the machine gun fire. In the past few days, Lydia and others have made a total of 5 machine guns, in addition to the 3 that were taken out to quell the chaos in the capital. The remaining 2 machine guns were placed in the Alchemy Research Institute. This thing has little effect on the Cardinal, so it has not been used. Now it is mounted on the 2 alchemy armored vehicles in front. Hot flames spewed out from the 2 machine guns, and the continuous barrage of bullets streaked through the sky like a meteor. Although Dirk could cut off the oncoming artillery, it was impossible to stop this dense barrage of bullets. The only thing he could do was to turn the divine energy supplied to the long sword to defense. How could a mere second-ring protective magic block the barrage of bullets? In just 1 second, it exploded under the bombardment of dozens of bullets, and the fine steel armor on its body was torn to pieces, followed by the strong body covered with scars. Red blood kept splashing out, and Dirk's body was soon smashed by the rain of bullets. His face was full of reluctance, and his broken body fell directly to the ground, crushed by the heavy wheels. The machine gun and armored torrent was just the beginning. A large number of airships also appeared above the city wall, and white phosphorus rain fell all over the sky, completely turning the tide of the battle. Even if the bishops were slow to realize it, they had already realized that something was wrong. This neat array, as well as those strange and powerful steel boxes, made them realize that this was not the internal and external cooperation of the God's punishment army that had infiltrated the capital, but that their enemies had launched a counterattack. How is this possible? An archbishop whispered in horror, with a chill in his heart. The current situation undoubtedly means that Edwell has been defeated. But they clearly felt the Lord's divine light just now. Those damn wizards have no chance of fighting against the power of God. Even if the bishops present were unwilling to believe it, they could not reverse the reality. The great defeat was almost in front of them. But now even escaping was a luxury. Their 2 legs simply could not run faster than 4 wheels. The swords and long knives in their hands could only rub out a few sparks when they chopped on the thick armor, not to mention the airship in the air. This war soon turned into a complete massacre. The pursuit lasted for most of the day, stretching from the capital to more than 10 kilometers away. The blood dyed the entire land red. The remaining more than 30,000 people surrendered one after another, and it is estimated that more than 70,000 people were killed. After the battle, Ham and others, who had been tired for a night, could no longer hold on and lay down in a pool of blood. Cheers resounded throughout the capital. However, compared to the last time, although they completely defeated the church's punitive army, the losses were difficult to predict. Because the God's punishment army rushed directly into the capital, coupled with the uninterrupted divine bombardment on the front battlefield, the casualties alone have reached tens of thousands. Among them, the royal guards accounted for the majority. Because they had no muskets in their hands, they could only swing swords in close combat, and were directly defeated. Nearly 1/3 of the area inside the capital was damaged to varying degrees, and more than 100 former wizards and more than 500 apprentices died on the battlefield. Whether it was the casualties or the degree of destruction, Lin En, who received the report, sighed. As for the reason why the god's punishment army could appear in the capital quietly, it has also been tortured from the mouths of those who were arrested. It was a passage that led directly from the slums to the dense forest outside the city. It was secretly built by the eldest prince. Very few people knew about it, and it was not recorded in any form. After learning this, Lin En immediately sent people to destroy and bury the passage to prevent the next tragedy from happening. The pilots of the airship did not have a moment's rest either. They were all sent out. Some were responsible for exploring and monitoring the enemy, while the other part went to the Sea of Misty Sea to look for the missing Aurora and others. Chapter 369. Can't chase, can't hit, can't run away. Is this called a battle? West of the kingdom of Hadrata, on the endless sea of fog, a strong divine light emerged, and the thick fog around it immediately dissipated at a speed visible to the naked eye. A fluttering flag emerged in the fog, followed by the huge strange pole on the hull, and then the entire fleet. This is the Empire's long-distance fleet. Each ship is a latest sailing warship, more than 70 meters long, just like a terrifying beast cutting through the waves on the sea. However, this mighty fleet rushed all the way, looking extremely embarrassed. Some of the warships at the back were seriously damaged, and there were even flames on the sails. The next moment, accompanied by bursts of artillery roars, hundreds of human-sized shells flew out of the fog, targeting the entire fleet. Although these artillery seemed to have no accuracy, most of them hit the sea, and some shells even fell directly hundreds of meters away from the target. In addition to blasting a column of water, there was no other meaning. However, the number of artillery fire was too large. Even if only 1/30th of them could hit the target, it was still a huge threat. Amid the faint hymns on the sea, invisible divine protection surrounded the sailing warships, resisting the attack of the shells. Casting such a large-scale divine magic was obviously a big challenge for these priests and bishops. More importantly, similar attacks would come almost every 10 minutes, leaving them no chance to rest and relax. A warship that fell behind the fleet was hit by 5 consecutive artillery shells. The divine protection covering the hull exploded instantly. The priests on the sailing warship vomited blood under the strong backlash. They could only watch the huge shells hit the hull and smash holes in the deck and hull. One of the projectiles was even more insidious with the explosion magic, and it immediately exploded after hitting the back of the ship, with flames and smoke rising into the sky. The huge hull was shaking and trembling, and it turned over and sank to the bottom of the water. The shrill screams continued to ring out, and the soldiers and priests on the ship could only jump into the sea to protect themselves and swim to the nearest ship with difficulty. This group of damned devil believers, the minions of the evil god, they should be thrown into hell and annihilate their souls in the endless hellfire. In the center of the fleet, on a giant warship, Cardinal Cyril cursed angrily, and the faces of the bishops beside him were also extremely ugly. Half a month ago, they were ordered to lead the Empire's first fleet, ready to set off at sea, and directly raid the base camp of those wizards, destroying this illegal wizard organization that has troubled the Holy See for many years, hiding in the fog like a mouse, and occasionally popping up to disgust people. But to their surprise, when the fleet was halfway through the journey, they coincidentally ran into a fleet of wizards. Judging from the direction of the other side, they should be going to rescue the kingdom of Hadratha. The number of ships was less than 1/3 of theirs. This was undoubtedly an unexpected gain, which made the bishops very happy. They rushed to meet them, intending to destroy the wizard fleet directly to reduce the pressure on the battlefield of the kingdom. It was only after the real war that they found that the enemy was not as weak as they imagined, but a real tough nut to crack. As soon as the battle started, the sharp artillery left a very deep impression on Cyril and others. Its number and power were far beyond the kerosene throwers loaded on their ships. This thing is said to be a new weapon developed by wizards. The specific information is still in the collection stage, so they were caught off guard. What annoyed Cyril the most was that when the first fleet decided to withstand the bombardment of artillery fire and force its way close to engage in a boarding battle, the fleet of wizards turned around and ran away. with no intention of contacting them at all, and even attacked with artillery while running. After a rough calculation, the range of artillery was more than 1 kilometer. In comparison, the kerosene throwers equipped by the fleet could only hit about 500 meters even with the blessing of divine arts. The remaining 500 meters was like a chasm in the sky. The first fleet chased for several hours and lost more than 30 warships before they suddenly realized that they could never cross this distance. The speed shown by the opponent was actually far from the limit, but it kept giving them the illusion that they could catch up as long as they were a little faster, so as to continuously consume the number of warships. After realizing this, the fleet gave up the pursuit under the order of the chief judge and turned around to continue sailing towards the land of wizards. However, the wizard ships were like a group of cunning and shameless hyenas. They turned back and hung behind them, keeping a distance from them. They continued to harass them with the advantages of speed and range, and destroyed dozens of ships in a row. Cyrud and others found themselves in an awkward situation where they could not catch up, hit or run away. They were like a living target standing on the sea, passively enduring the opponent's rounds of artillery fire. It was extremely aggrieved. Some bishops with bad tempers fainted directly from anger. Cyrud had also tried to approach and attack those ships directly with the flying ability of the cardinal, but the problem was that their flying speed was not as fast as that of the steel giant ship, and once they approached a distance of 200 meters, they would have to face the attack of dozens of magic crystal cannons. A cardinal was almost blown to death on the spot, and they could only turn back in disgrace. The sound of gunfire continued. After this round of shooting, 2 more warships sank to the bottom of the water with flames. The fleet of the wizards finally came out of the fog. There were about 100 ships at a glance. All of them were without sails, but they were able to move forward rapidly on the sea, running several times faster than their sailing warships. The most eye-catching thing was the 4 giant warships in front. Each of them was more than 100 meters long and more than 30 meters high. The shell was made of all metal. It looked like it weighed hundreds or even thousands of tons, like a mobile fortress on the sea. Cyrud couldn't imagine what kind of powerful witchcraft those wizards had used to make the giant steel ship sail rapidly in the sea. Seeing that the ferocious gun barrels on the steel giant ships began to adjust their positions, and the next round of shelling was about to come, Cyrud hurriedly turned his head to look at the presiding judge and spoke anxiously. "Lord Joshua, should we start now? If they continue fighting like this, the Empire's fleet will be consumed by rounds of bombardment, and they won't even be able to touch the enemy." Chapter 370. The Battle on the Misty Sea. In the midst of Cyrud's anxious questioning, the presiding judge Joshua, who was wearing a purple gold robe, did not respond, but the cardinal beside him spoke at the right time. "I guess their sensing range is about 1.5 kilometers. Since they haven't changed direction yet, it proves that they haven't noticed our deployment yet." The reason why the wizards' fleets were able to harass the Imperial fleet all the way in the foggy sea, in addition to the advantages brought by the speed and attack range of the ships, the most important point is that the wizards seem to have some ability to locate them through the fog. In recent times, although the fog on the sea has been reduced a lot, the visibility is still only about 300 to 400 meters, and it still has a certain ability to block perception. Unless they use magic to dispel the fog all the time, they can't even see the shadow of the enemy ship. It should be about time. Let's act. Joshua nodded and raised the scepter in his hand. An invisible wave of divine magic quickly spread across the sea. At the same time, on the steel giant ship 1 kilometer away, Dick operated the turrets on the deck and accurately hit a sailing ship. He watched the hull flip over and sink to the bottom of the water in the fire, and immediately spoke happily. "Hit again. So refreshing." Aurora also had a little smile on her face. It must be said that this battle was really comfortable. Whether it is the number of ships or the high-end combat power, they can be said to be at an absolute disadvantage. This Empire's fleet has more than 300 ships, and there are more than 10 cardinals alone. The number of enemy troops is probably more than 90,000. The purpose of the Holy See to make such a big scene is self-evident, that is to destroy the entire wizard land. It just happened to be bumped into by them, which has to be said to be a kind of luck. After all, the Parliament has now invested most of its power in the Kingdom War, Once these people land in the port city, they will inevitably cause unimaginable damage. Even if the remaining wizards can eventually drive out this punitive army, they will inevitably have to pay a very heavy price. It is more likely that the entire wizard land will fall. So Aurora did not hesitate to interrupt the plan to support the kingdom, sent 3 ships to pass the information here back to the parliament, and the remaining people tried their best to stop the imperial fleet. When making this decision, Aurora was even prepared to suffer heavy losses and buy time for the war preparations of the wizard land, but Tick and others' command method for the naval battle was far beyond her expectations. Generally speaking, in naval battles, magic crystal cannons are used for several rounds of bombardment first, and then boarding battles are entered, or relying on the advantage of the size of the ship, they directly hit it and crush the enemy ship directly. But the naval battle manual provided by Lin En provided them with a more novel idea. The speed of the steel ships equipped with internal combustion engines is more than 3 times that of those sailing warships, and the attack distance reaches a full kilometer. In addition to the obstruction of fog, they can always stay outside the opponent's attack range, slowly eroding and consuming the enemy's manpower, and easily playing with the enemy who is much stronger on paper. Once those powerful cardinals dare to leave the team to launch an attack, they will have to face hundreds of artillery on the ship, dozens of magic crystal cannons and a large number of wizards' righteous siege. No matter how strong the opponent is, it can't withstand such an offensive. I didn't expect that naval battles can be fought like this, Aurora said with emotion. The number of these ships has been reduced by half. If they continue to pursue like this, they will be completely destroyed in less than a day, Tick said complacently. He could see that this imperial fleet should want to forcibly land in the wizard's land under the attack of artillery fire, but the problem is that they are still far away from their destination. With the pitiful speed of these sailing warships, it will take at least 3 days. It's just a foolish dream. However, after hearing Tick's words, Aurora's face changed. She looked at the sailing fleet in the distance and murmured in a low voice, "This is not right." "What's wrong, Lady Aurora?" Tick asked with a confused look on his face. "It's the number of ships that is wrong." Aurora raised her voice a little, and then used the amplification magic to shout loudly, "Everyone, turn around immediately." She clearly remembered that the Empire's expeditionary fleet had 300 sailing warships. But now there were only more than 100 ships left. Although they had been chasing the other side for several hours and fired thousands of shells, under the protection of the divine arts of those priests and bishops, they would never cause such a degree of damage to the entire fleet. Not to mention, in this pursuit, the priests of the Holy See did not hesitate to use divine arts at the beginning, which consumed a lot. Later, in order to save energy, they were even too lazy to release the divine arts to dispel the fog. Now they are using it again. There must be something wrong. The next second after Aurora realized something was wrong, the escaping Imperial fleet suddenly changed direction, and huge sailing warships turned on the sea, causing waves. Wind, with roars. The glory of divine arts enveloped each ship, and the speed suddenly increased, increasing by more than 50% in a short period of time. Such speed was nothing in front of their new warships, but Aurora's face was extremely solemn, because she vaguely sensed that there were also strong divine arts fluctuations on the left and right sides of them, 1.5 kilometers away. But now there is no need to sense it, because the two fleets crossed the barrier of the fog and entered their field of vision, forming a triangle to surround the fleet in the center. Tick instantly understood that the reason why the other party had not fought back and did not dispel the fog was to let them relax their vigilance, and secretly separated some of the ships, and now formed a siege. How dared they? Tick's face was horrified. "You know, this is the Sea of Fog. Once the distance is too far, they will be separated from the fleet and lack the guidance of the main ship. These separated ships will most likely lose their way in this sea full of thick fog. But no matter what, the Imperial fleet has already rushed towards them. The distance of 1 kilometer is neither close nor far." Aurora had to order the fleet to break through to the west where the number of enemy ships is the least. The roar of the artillery sounded again. This time, the gunners were no longer stingy with ammunition. The flying artillery fire almost never stopped. However, The priests and bishops on the sailing warships were so frustrated that they were about to explode. Now they finally had the opportunity to fight back. They all tried their best to resist the attack of artillery fire with divine magic. Chapter 371. A giant steel ship sailing through a sea of fire. On the vast, foggy sea, the sound of continuous artillery fire rang out. The deafening explosion could be clearly heard even from more than 10 kilometers away. In just 5 minutes, the fleet unleashed thousands of shells, but most of them deflected or were blocked by divine protection. After 3 rounds of powerful attacks, a total of 20 enemy ships were sunk. But in contrast, the huge fleet of sailing warships had already approached within a range of 400 meters. The heavy catapults began to operate, and one by one, wooden projectiles doused in kerosene, crossed hundreds of meters under the blessing of divine magic and smashed into the flagship at the front. Multiple pyroblast, secondary magic protection, ice curtain. A group of wizards hurriedly cast spells to stop the flying kerosene. The hot fireballs collided with the flaming projectiles, and suddenly aroused the flames all over the sky. The dark oil and the splashing wood chips were scattered on the sea, and the fire spread rapidly on the wide sea along the black oil. Since this special oil was discovered, it has been used on a large scale by the Empire in wars. It is not only a siege weapon, but also performs very well in naval battles. It is fatal to wooden ships. The spreading sea of fire can greatly reduce the morale of the enemy. However, what they are facing is obviously not an ordinary opponent. 4 steel battleships fearlessly travel through the sea of fire, clearing the way for the alchemy fleet behind. Quick, quick, attack me, and never let them rush over. A cardinal roared loudly on a sailing ship with the holy light emblem flying. Although it is impossible to defeat the fleet of wizards with just these dozens of ships on the flanks, their mission is not to win the battle. They only need to slightly block the opponent's actions. When the main fleet arrives, the situation will be completely reversed. The priests and bishops on the sailing ships began to chant hymns, and countless arrows flashing with the glory of divine arts appeared in the void and poured towards the wizards' fleet. These arrows constructed by divine arts are extremely powerful and can easily penetrate solid armor. They also have the effect of breaking magic. This round of divine arts attacks, and the wizard's array also suffered casualties for the first time. An alchemy ship was broken through the defense, and a large amount of kerosene fell all over its head, and soon the entire ship was ignited. The cardinal in charge of command was not idle either. In the high-pitched hymn, a huge sacred power began to surge around him. Praise, judgment of heaven. The strong divine energy gradually condensed together, revealing a terrifying silence. However, at this moment, a strong laser beam came from behind and arrived first, passing through a distance of hundreds of meters, and went straight through his chest, and then cut the entire sailing warship in half from top to bottom like a knife into butter. The condensed divine energy instantly dissipated, and in the explosion and fire, the huge sailing warship was cut apart and fell to the sides, raising a huge wave. It was Aurora who made the move. Regarding the use and mastery of laser beam magic, she was no worse than Lin En. She had not made a move before only because the opponent's ship was not able to get close to the attack range. 230 meters. This is the farthest distance that the 4th energy level laser beam can cut and destroy the hull. Aurora held the laser beam in her hand and swept out again. This time the target was another dozen sailing warships that were already approaching. The priests and bishops who witnessed the power of the laser beam were all scared, but the attack came too fast and too suddenly. Before they could think of a way to deal with it, the terrifying beam had already swept through their bodies, and the divine protection around them was like paper, easily penetrated. The expression of fear still remained on their faces, and their heads and bodies were separated. Only 3 sailing warships that were a little further away were lucky enough to escape the disaster. But the next moment they were targeted by a cannon, and the silent magic crystal cannons also began to gather momentum. A round of volleys blew these lucky ships into several pieces. After the gunfire dissipated, the sea was already covered with debris and blood. After defeating a dozen enemy ships that blocked the way, the road ahead was unobstructed. But the sacrifice of this flank was not meaningless. because the main fleet of the Empire had approached within hundreds of meters. Aurora keenly sensed the frightening energy fluctuations behind her. "This is a legendary magic." On the huge sailing flagship, Chief Judge Joshua raised the scepter in his hand, and his high voice echoed throughout the sea. "God sent down the rain and gathered into a stream. The rivers and the ocean are all creations of God. The evil that sets foot here will be destroyed." The moment Joshua's voice fell, the rolling sea surface under the bombardment of artillery fire was actually lifted up. Huge waves tens of meters high surged on the sea surface, rolling and surging, sweeping in with a devastating attitude, and actually wanted to destroy the entire fleet in one breath. The terrifying legendary magic made the wizards and the fleet change their faces suddenly, but they still quickly organized a resistance. Ice field. 6 great wizards and hundreds of former wizards cast spells together, and the roaring waves froze at a speed visible to the naked eye. The leaping waves froze into a huge ice wall blocking the two fleets. A strong laser beam reappeared, and the beam with a diameter of only 0.05 millimeters cut through the huge ice wall and attacked the flagship of the Empire in the rear. The speed of light is so fast that it is unimaginable. However, after being blocked and deflected by the ice, its power was greatly reduced. After breaking through the divine protection, it only cut a long hole on the hull of the flagship. The seawater continued to pour in, and the sailing warship began to become shaky. A trace of anger surged on Joshua's face, and a divine light appeared on the scepter in his hand. But the next moment he seemed to sense something and looked up at the foggy sky. 50 large and sophisticated airships appeared in the distant sky, rushing towards here. "It's the alchemical creation of the wizards," Asird said solemnly. According to the kingdom's spies, it was this kind of thing called an airship that destroyed the coalition forces of tens of thousands of kingdoms. Joshua stared at the approaching airship, and after a moment, he sighed and said, "Pass the order, retreat." With the addition of these air forces, if they want to force their way into the wizards' land, they will have to pay a very heavy price. Even he had to admit that these wizards did have an unparalleled advantage on the sea. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 372 How to Deal with God's Descendant. With the help of the ice wall, the Empire's fleet began to turn back. In order to avoid the opponent's pursuit, Joshua created a tornado that was tens of meters high and kept surging, which completely separated the two fleets, and then calmly sank into the depths of the foggy sea. Aurora and others on the other side also successfully joined the reinforcements. After the two sides checked the intelligence, Aurora heard that the war in the capital had ended, and it was extremely thrilling. The cardinal in the intelligence actually possessed legendary power and almost summoned that person. "It seems that my prediction is a little wrong." Aurora frowned. According to her previous guess, since the Holy See decided to send an expeditionary fleet to attack the wizard land, the kingdom was probably just a feint. Unexpectedly, the Holy See was so generous and planned to bloom on both ends, recovering the kingdom in one fell swoop and destroying the entire wizard land. It was a pity that they did not transmit intelligence in real time across the entire foggy sea. The fleet she sent back should have just missed Herve and Vittorio, who were rushing to support the capital. "Lady Aurora, should we continue to pursue?" Tick asked hurriedly. Now with the help of the airship, they once again took the initiative in the war and could completely keep the Empire's expeditionary fleet here with the sea and air. This was undoubtedly a very tempting idea. Aurora shook her head after thinking for a moment. "No. Just arrange some people to search and track them for the time being. If they show signs of attacking again, we will launch an attack." After fighting at sea for most of the day, the fleet's ammunition had been almost consumed. The same was true for the air and space airships that came to support. They had just finished a decisive battle and had not even had time to rest. They hurried here. The shrapnel they carried was not enough to deal with another war. More importantly, she was worried that the legendary priest on the Imperial fleet would be forced into a corner and would summon the false god to come like Headwell. That would be a difficult matter. However, since the other party did not use it rashly during the war, It means that the use of that magic will cost at least a heavier price than the loss of 1/3 of the expedition fleet. When Aurora led the fleet to the capital, it was already several days later. The capital was still filled with smoke and traces of damage could be seen everywhere, especially the slums that served as the battlefield, which were severely damaged and suffered a large number of casualties. Lin En thought this was a very good opportunity and directly sent out all the personnel except the necessary guards to help the people affected by the disaster. Even the wizards were no exception. Although they did not look down on these poor people, they were still very convinced of Lin En, the magic star. Now the whole capital is rumored that this magic star and the 2 legendary chairmen drove out the false gods who descended on the capital. So much so that some people speculated whether Lin En had broken through to the legendary realm. Otherwise how could he intervene in such a level of battle? However, this speculation was too exaggerated, because as far as they knew, this magic star had just broken through to become a 4th-ring wizard a few months ago. And most wizards scoffed at such rumors, because there was a rumor that after the battle, Master Lin En was seriously injured, and Raphael, who was also at the scene at the time, was severely injured and lay in bed for several days. So the real situation is likely that the 2 legendary speakers were responsible for fighting while protecting the 2. In any case, the wizards still faithfully carried out the orders given, using magic to restore the damaged streets and houses. In just 5 days, the repair work was half completed, and the efficiency was incredibly fast. Not every poor person in the capital was hopelessly corrupted by faith. After 2 consecutive rescues without leaving any effort, most people realized that it was the so-called messengers of God who caused the destruction, and it was the evil gods and devil minions who helped them repair the houses. As a member of the poor, Haydn strengthened his previous belief that those wizards were not as terrible as the church propaganda. On the contrary, Haydn felt that the church's priests and nobles would never pay money or use magic to help them repair the damaged house. Lin En did not have much time to pay attention to the rumors that were spreading wildly in the capital and the change of the poor people's minds. After the war, there were too many tedious things to deal with. Even a sick person like Lin En had to go to work with illness. After Aurora and others successfully returned to the capital, the parliament immediately held an internal meeting. Although the airship had reported what happened on the Sea of Fog before they arrived at the capital, they did not know the specific details. Now Aurora personally told the whole story. "I didn't expect that the Holy See had mastered the method to locate the wizard's land," Raphael said with fear, his face still with a bit of sick paleness. After 5 days of recuperation, Raphael barely got out of the half-dead state, and it would take at least half a month to recover completely. In fact, facing the blow of God, he was very lucky to be alive. After listening to Aurora's story, the wizards present were also terrified. The defense of the wizard land is now extremely empty, and the Hyaenan defense force is less than a quarter of the previous one. Only 9 of the 30 great wizards remain there. The 3 speakers, Vittorio, and Aurora, have also gone to the kingdom to support. Only the legendary, Element Master, Arctic is still in the wizard land. However, Raphael and others know that this legendary speaker is crazy, and it is unrealistic to expect him to come out and organize people. "You did the right thing. Compared with the kingdom, it is more important to delay the fleet on the sea." Prov nodded. They could not afford the cost of losing the wizard land. The communication problem needs to be solved as soon as possible to prevent similar things from happening again. Vittorio added that it is too slow to rely on ships and airships to send messages, and the existing communication array is not enough to cross such a long distance. Everyone present soon began to discuss the development of a new type of communication magic, but it wasn't long before the topic turned to a more important matter, which was how to deal with the Vatican's terrifying divine intervention. Chapter 373, The Divine Descent at the Cost of Legend. Chairman Heref, you have faced that false god, so you should know something about her. Aurora looked at the 2 legendary chairmen and asked. Heref and Vittorio looked at each other, then shook their heads and sighed. It can only be said that the gap is greater than you think. Even if you work together, it is not enough to contain that person. Aurora frowned and asked puzzledly, "In fact, Edwell's divine descent was not completely completed. We just had a face-to-face encounter with the so-called false god, Heref said helplessly. She only used one divine spell from beginning to end. Although I barely blocked it, I was not sure that I could crack it, Vittorio added on the side. In fact, if Master Lin hadn't sneakily killed Edwell, the caster, I'm afraid we would all have died there. At this point, Vittorio paused, recalling the powerful divine art that seemed to be able to prohibit time and space, and defeated their magic in an instant. Even the powerful and strange eternal flame mastered by Lin was not immune. As soon as these words came out, the wizards present were horrified. Regarding the battle in the capital, the two speakers who participated in it, as well as Master Lin and Raphael, had kept their mouths shut before. They could only learn some inside stories from the few words of Pierce and others, so they always thought that the two legendary speakers defeated the false god who dominated the church and successfully expelled the other party. But they didn't expect that the facts were very different from what they thought. If even the legendary speakers have no hope of defeating the other party together, then the next time the other party uses this kind of divine descent, won't they just be at the mercy of others? Thinking of this, Sanchez and others were immediately worried, and noisy discussions soon resounded in the conference room. Some people even thought that they should immediately withdraw from the kingdom of Hadrada, return to the land of wizards to defend the sea, and then find a way to repair the protection of the Sea of Mist. Such remarks soon gained the support of nearly half of the wizards, since the strength of the false god Ella far exceeded their expectations and there was no hope of defeating the opponent. It would be better to stay in the land of wizards as before. Seeing that the remarks of the turtle faction were getting more and more intense, Lin En could not sit still and had to remind them, don't forget, the Holy See sent an expeditionary fleet to the Sea of Mist this time, which means that they must have found a way to locate the land of wizards. Now if they want to go back and defend, they are just sitting and waiting to die. The area of the land of wizards is really too small, with a population of only 600,000 and a serious shortage of various resources. Continuing to be closed as before will greatly hinder the development of industry. Moreover, they have spent a lot of time and energy on the Magic Kingdom project, and invested countless resources. If they evacuate now, they will lose a lot. Then what can we do? Master Lin En, you and the two speakers can't defeat that false god, right? At least in the wizard land, we can still use the geographical advantages to block the crusade of the church at sea. A great wizard who supports the retreat faction said with a little annoyance. Tick also nodded. If there is a way, no one would want to curl up like this. The victory of these two wars was exchanged for the lives of many wizards, and they have also made a lot of efforts. At least we are still standing here, which means that things are not bad enough to evacuate, Lin En said calmly, and immediately attracted everyone's attention. I think, Gate of Heaven, is definitely not a divine art that can be used easily. Otherwise when the Imperial fleet was hit hard, the other party should have used God's descent. Isn't that right, Lady Aurora? Lin En turned around and asked. Aurora nodded, which was exactly what she had guessed. The counselors present immediately fell into deep thought. They were frightened by the words of the two speakers just now, and now they realized that the Holy See should not be able to perform the magic of the descent of the gods at will. Sir Vittorio, have you found any useful information from the brain of the captured cardinal? Lin En looked at the magic creator next to him and asked expectantly. After the war in the kingdom ended, they captured many priests and bishops alive. Among them, the most senior one was Cardinal Person, who was also the most likely to know this information. However, due to the reason of faith, this was not an easy task. Person's memory was protected by the powerful power of divine magic. It was easy to be backfired if he rashly used psychic magic to explore his memory, so this job was in charge of Vittorio. According to Person's memory, that kind of magic of the descent of the gods may require a legend as the price, Vittorio said in a deep voice. In just 5 days, he did not completely crack Person's brain, but he still got a lot of useful information. For example, in the hundreds of years of history of the church, there are only 6 records of using the Gate of Heaven. The casters are undoubtedly legendary clergymen, and these people often resign and retreat to the second line after the war, and even their lifespan is greatly reduced. One of the saints died within a few years. Obviously, it is not so easy to carry the power of God, because once this spell is cast, regardless of success or failure, the church will inevitably lose a top combat force. In addition, he speculated that L's body might be in another space, that is, the so-called heaven, which is subject to some restrictions and cannot stay in the outside world for a long time. Vittorio said all his speculations. Sanchez and others were slightly relieved. In this way, they don't have to worry about the false god suddenly flying over and destroying them all when they are sleeping one day. Unless it is absolutely necessary, it is estimated that no legend will easily give up his power and life. According to their intelligence, the church now has 5 legendary level existences. Adwell is an accident and belongs to the existence outside the intelligence. There should be only one such example. After all, it is not so easy to break through to the legendary level. You should know that the legendary speakers in the wizard land have accumulated their talents over time and have a longer lifespan. Great wizards can break through the limits of the human body and live to about 200 years old. But no one knows how long a legendary wizard can live. For example, the oldest speaker among the speakers, Vittorio, has an unknown age, but he has been in the wizard land for more than 300 years and his experience is also very mysterious. It is rumored that the legendary speaker's talent is not good, and he did not break through to the legendary level until he was over 180 years old. Chapter 374. Since we can't defeat the enemy at the atomic level, let's try quantum. After the analysis of Magic Creator, Vittorio, the fear of the gods among the parliamentarians present was reduced a lot. Since there was no way to compete with the false god for the time being, they should try to avoid direct contact with the other party. They could kill the caster directly to interrupt the magic, just like Master Lin En and the legendary speakers did this time, or use assassination to eliminate the commander of the Holy See's God's punishment army, the chief judge and other high-level officials one by one. Amid the enthusiastic discussion of the crowd, Lin En was not so optimistic. Even if they tried their best to avoid it, the goddess would sooner or later be an enemy they had to face. Moreover, the clergy of the church could not be judged by common sense. Some fanatics were completely crazy and willing to give up everything for God. In their view, death might just be returning to the Lord's arms in advance. As for how to defeat Ella, Lin En already had some ideas in his mind. Since the other party could control magic, divine arts, mimic atoms and molecules with great precision, it would be wishful thinking to defeat the other party from this level. Their only hope is to overtake others and enter the more microscopic quantum realm, so as to develop magic that can kill gods. Just as Lin En was thinking about it, Herval the side suddenly spoke up. Master Lin En, I wonder what the secret society thinks about the war between the church and the kingdom? Hearing this, the discussion in the conference room suddenly subsided. Raphael and others suddenly remembered that in addition to the Wizard Council, there were also people from the secret society participating in this war. This is a powerful foreign aid. Although they don't know much about this mysterious wizard organization, they can get some clues from all aspects. For example, the members of the secret society that they know now are all the best among wizards. Needless to say, Lin En was trained by a legendary wizard from the secret society. He has already broken through to become a great wizard at such a young age. He also has extraordinary attainments in mathematics, force field, elements, and alchemy. In the 2 years since arriving in the wizard land, he has won a corona and 2 silver moon medals, and has become a magic star that everyone is paying attention to. If he had not published any important papers on shaping and potion science, they would have almost thought that Master Lin En was omnipotent. There is also Anthony, a 6-ring wizard, who developed powerful thunder magic on his own. It can be said that he created a new school with his own strength, allowing former wizards to control the power of thunder. Finally, there is Master Leibniz, who proposed calculus. His argument with a great wizard named Zeno about the turtle race went viral throughout the wizard land, triggering a debate about movement and stillness, finiteness and infinity. So in Raphael's view, the members of the Secret Law Society are a group of talented and knowledgeable wizards, and there should be legendary wizards among them. If they are willing to cooperate sincerely with the parliament, then their chances of defeating the Holy See will be greatly increased. Under the gaze of the expected target of the parliamentarians, Lin En spoke carefully. There is a lot of debate within the secret society about this war with the church. There are quite a few people who support it, but in the end, there are more people who are on the sidelines. Many people also think that our strength alone is not enough to defend the entire kingdom. After Lin En's narration, Raphael and others finally understood that the secret society is a loose academic organization that prefers to recruit academic researchers. Everyone usually gathers in this small universe, and they may not even know each other's identity. However, the so-called identity and status are not valued within the society, because knowledge is everything here. The members of the secret society have different views on this war, and it is impossible for them to organize a large number of people to come to reinforce like the parliament. While Lin En supplemented the settings of the secret society, he secretly thought that he would have to fool more wizards from the kingdom and the empire in the future, and let them join the school as members of the society, so that he could fool them. As for the leaders of the secret society, I think they should be interested in that false god. Lin En spoke again. Could it be that they want to join the war to destroy the church? Trev was quite surprised and a little surprised. I don't know about that. Lin En shook his head. Aurora on the side suddenly asked, I heard that the secret society asked you to give the secret ring to the wisest person after entering the wizard land, so you gave it to Trev. Is that right? Lin En heard the dissatisfaction in the witch's words, and for a moment he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. At that time, he only knew of a legendary wizard, and Aurora and Vittorio were the masters of the prophecy school and the alchemy institute, and they were not the most suitable targets. The secret society never rejects knowledgeable people like the two presidents. The last time was just a preliminary contact and understanding. I think you will definitely receive an invitation at the next discussion meeting. Aurora and Vittorio nodded. They were still very interested in the secret society. Trev was looking forward to it, but also a little worried. After all, he almost lost face when he attended the legendary gathering last time. He spent more than a year to fully understand the theories and conjectures about the formation of the world that the other party talked about. The internal meeting of the parliamentarians lasted for a whole morning. In addition to how to deal with the divine descent, the focus of the discussion was on whether to continue to defend the capital or take the initiative to recover the kingdom's territory, or even enter the empire. Hatcher has urged this several times, because now nearly half of the kingdom's territory has fallen, and he is almost unworthy of the title of king. However, this empty-headed king obviously could not influence the decision of the parliament. After several rounds of discussions, Lin En decided to hold on for a while and restore logistics, especially the production of ammunition. In this defense of the capital, the Alchemy Research Institute has already produced a powerful weapon, the machine gun, and its performance on the battlefield is also very good. With only 3 machine guns, it killed hundreds of God's punishment army within a minute. This record is undoubtedly amazing. You must know that these God's punishment army defeated thousands of guards and musketeers, but they became the target of the machine gun fire. As long as the supply of ammunition can be guaranteed, they can take the initiative in the war. Chapter 375 New Ace of Aerial Combat, Fighter, Dean Lin. Have an apple. Does it feel good to be hammered like this? Dean, it's time to take medicine. In a luxurious courtyard in the capital of Hadrada, Lin was lying on a comfortable table and chair, receiving meticulous care from the wizards of the academy. In the last battle to defend the capital, Lin forcibly mobilized all the computing power of the magic network to cast the eternal flame and laser magic. The strong backlash afterwards almost caused him to have brain death. Although he was rescued after drinking 2 legendary potions in a row, he could not cast magic at will for a short time. This scared Alok and others a lot. After all, Lin, the magic star, was the backbone of the entire school and could not afford any mistakes. After Lin repeatedly assured that he was in good condition and just needed to rest, the wizards of the academy were still very worried. They collected a lot of precious potions for him that could restore mental damage and increase vitality, and a strict recuperation plan by a master who was proficient in herbal medicine. In general, It was to eat well, drink more, and do nothing. In addition, hundreds of wizards and a whole army of new soldiers equipped with percussion guns were arranged to take charge of the security of the manor, fearing that an enemy would sneak in at this time to kill the magic star who had no ability to resist. Johnny, who was familiar with Lin En, Lydia, Elrock and others were sent to take care of Lin En's daily life and provide close protection. According to Orlando, this was the top priority of the school at present. Orlando and others' overly stressful arrangements made Lin En feel very helpless. He just couldn't use magic power at will for the time being, and he was not a useless person. Even when he was the weakest, he could knock out a dozen brainwashed guards with his fists. But it must be said that this kind of life of having everything he wanted was very comfortable. Even if he was not a useless person, he felt that he was about to be raised into a useless person. Master Dean, this is a purple fruit. King Hatcher sent it here. I've tried it for you. It's not poisonous and tastes very good. Beside him, Lydia pinched a peeled purple fruit and put it into Lin's mouth. Then she pinched his thigh very attentively, but her strength was amazing, and Lin gritted his teeth in pain. Okay, let go. Lin helplessly slapped the halfling girl's hand away. If he continued to pinch like this, he would never get his leg back. Lydia shrank her neck, like a little animal that had done something wrong, with a pitiful look. Tell me, what do you want to talk to me about? Lin shook his head and asked. Although Lydia was one of the people sent to take care of his daily life, she had been slacking off these days, secretly fiddling with some strange things. Today, she was suddenly so attentive. There must be something wrong. I drew a blueprint. I want you to take a look at it for me. Lydia quickly took out a design from her bosom and unfolded it in front of Lin En. The blueprint showed a rough and crude-looking aircraft, which was very similar to the aircraft he saw when he first came to Yayata Harbor, but it could be seen that many adjustments had been made to the details. Lydia stared at Lin En nervously. Although the appearance of the airship satisfied her dream of flying into the sky, it was the masterpiece of the Dean after all. In the past year or so, Lydia has not given up the idea of making her own aircraft, and she remembered that Lin En had said that there was nothing wrong with her design concept. The biggest reason why the aircraft she made was difficult to take off into the sky was the lack of power. The appearance of the internal combustion engine obviously made up for this and made the improvement of the aircraft possible. In her imagination, although this aircraft cannot transport troops and weapons and ammunition like an airship, its advantage is that it flies faster and is lighter. If a machine gun or beam weapon is loaded in the front, it can fight the Griffin Knights head-on in the air. Lin En carefully checked it for a few times, and after letting the intelligent brain analyze it, he smiled and said, "Very good, there is progress." "Then can it fly?" Lydia asked impatiently. "There is no problem flying this time," Lin En said thoughtfully, but before Lydia jumped up excitedly, he spoke again. "But if you want to reach a speed of 200 kilometers per hour at full power as you expected, it is impossible. The shape of this aircraft is still lacking, and it cannot effectively resist wind resistance. The materials are also not up to standard. In the case of high-speed driving, it will definitely fall apart. Didn't I give you an introductory note on aerodynamics before? How much have you read?" Lin En asked back. Hearing the word aerodynamics, Lydia's face suddenly became tangled. "That thing is too difficult to understand. It is simply not something that humans can learn." Before reading this notebook, Lydia always thought that she had an extraordinary talent in mathematics. She could quickly master equations, exponents, and geometry, and even understood part of calculus. However, aerodynamics made her learn it in a fog. It was hard to imagine that this was just the basics. Seeing the troubled look of the halfling girl, Lin En guessed that Lydia had not learned it. Of course, this is normal. Aerodynamics is a branch of fluid mechanics. The amount of knowledge and calculation involved is very huge. Even until modern times, some problems about fluid mechanics have not been solved. It was not until the 22nd century that relatively accurate predictions and calculations were achieved with the rapid development of quantum computers. The notebook that Lin En gave to Lydia was naturally very old, based on classical mechanics. Unexpectedly, the difficulty was still too high. "You can compare the air to the sea, and your aircraft is the fish swimming in the sea. Their body shape is to better resist the resistance of the seawater. This is also reflected in birds. I call it streamlined. Lin En used his hand as a pen and magic as ink to slightly modify the drawings while explaining it to Lydia. Lydia stared at Lin En writing and drawing on the drawings. In just 5 minutes, all the details had been fine-tuned. The frame is still the same frame, but it looks much more beautiful, with an indescribable beauty. Lin En didn't know what Lydia was thinking, otherwise he would definitely tell her that beauty itself is power. Powerful war machines usually look very beautiful and domineering, because that is the design that best conforms to nature. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.